It's on. Button, respond when you're done. Make sure.
Good morning. The committee will come to order. So I want to thank members for being here this morning. We have 2 items of committee business to address today before we go into the committee on the issues that are before us. But as far as the business is concerned, a resolution is to assign Representative Kennedy to subcommittees on the House Committee of Veterans Affairs and make other changes to the subcommittee membership, and a resolution to issue a subpoena to the Department of Veterans Affairs for the production of documents related to VA's implementation of Executive Order 14019. I now call up resolution appointing members of subcommittee offered by Representative Takano. The clerk will report.
A resolution offered by Mr. Takano.
The resolution was circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules, and without objection, the first reading is dispensed with, and the resolution is open to amendment at any point. Now, I recognize myself to explain the resolution. The resolution will appoint Representative Kennedy to the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigation and the Subcommittee on Technology and Modernization. It also moves Representatives Cheflis McCormick to Subcommittee on Health and Representative Landsman to Subcommittee on Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs. Now, I am pleased, obviously he's not here right now, to welcome Representative Kennedy to the Committee on Veterans Affairs, and I think he'll be a great member to have. We will recognize him if he gets in a little bit. So that is what is before us, and I now recognize Ranking Member for any comments he might have on this resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to take a moment to welcome the committee's newest member, Representative Timothy M. Kennedy from New York State. Veterans Affairs is the perfect committee fit for Representative Kennedy. Outside of being an elected official, he is an occupational therapist and has been working for years to expand care options for people with spinal cord injury or a debilitating stroke. As a state senator in New York, Representative Kennedy secured over $1 million in state funding for a local clinic to renovate their space and purchase state-of-the-art physical and occupational therapy equipment. Representative Kennedy has already hit the ground running, having visited the Buffalo VA Medical Center with my staff last month to meet with staff and acting leadership. Representative Kennedy, we are excited to have your background and perspective as an occupational therapist on our committee. You will be joining our Technology Modernization and Oversight Investigation subcommittees. Welcome, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back, and Mr. Kennedy, welcome to the committee. You have we are now moving a resolution to put you on the committee and put you on your subcommittees. So with that, no amendments were filed. Does any member wish to offer an amendment to the resolution? Hearing none, I now recognize Ranking Member Takano for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee approve this resolution.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Independent chair, the ayes have it, and the resolution is agreed to. Welcome to the committee. Mr. Kennedy, would you like to say something?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Takano, colleagues. I'm honored to be a part of this auspicious committee to do the great work on behalf of our nation, on behalf of our veterans, those that serve us, and the families that make the sacrifices to allow us to be the greatest democracy in the history of the world. It is truly a privilege to be a part of this committee, and I look forward to working with each and every one of you. Thank you.
Look forward to working with you. Gentleman yields back. I now call up the resolution to issue a subpoena to the Department of Veterans Affairs for the production of documents, communications related to VA's implementation of Executive Order 14019, promoting access to voting. The clerk shall report.
A resolution offered by Chairman Mike Bost, authorizing issuance.
The resolution has been circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. The resolution is now open for amendment at any point, and I now recognize myself on the resolution. When I became chairman of this committee, I did not expect we would be meeting about elections and voters registration. However, The Biden and Harris administration made this our business when they issued an executive order that told VA to get involved in voter registration activities. VA also made it our business today by ignoring the majority of my questions over the last several months. This executive order has drastically changed the role of federal agencies in the electoral process. Agencies have been directed to partner with approved nonpartisan organizations to provide voter registration services at agency facilities. You may wonder, what is an approved third-party organization? Well, it is the Biden-Harris administration defines what it means. Select what organizations fit that definition, and then won't disclose who these approved nonpartisan organizations are. That's unacceptable. Although it is clear that Biden-Harris administration thinks otherwise, Congress has a very good reason to want to know who these groups are. Through the executive order, the VA, Department of Justice, the Peace Corps, and every other federal agency has been told to use their resources to partner with states as voter registration agencies. For VA's entire existence, it has never operated as a voter registration agency until this executive order. In fact, in 2008, hold on, I think there's supposed to be a slide up on at this time, isn't it? I'll go ahead and go on. In fact, in 2008, California asked VA to become a voter registration agency. Then Secretary James Peake declined California's request because becoming the voter registration agency would, and I quote, diminish the agency's ability to fulfill its mission of providing medical care and benefits to veterans, end quote. Fast forward to 2021. The Biden-Harris administration took it upon themselves to direct every federal agency to agree to become a voter registration agency if asked by a state, regardless of whether it diminishes the agency's ability to fulfill its mission. As former Secretary Peake put it, if this was not concerning enough, the Biden-Harris administration, which planned and executed all aspects of the executive order, refused to share strategic plans that the VA and every other agency submit to the Biden-Harris administration. Folks, this is not how the Constitution says our system of check and balance is supposed to work. I've sent VA 3 letters asking straightforward questions about this executive order, and for nearly 3 months, VA has ignored most of them. Although the VA refused to explain themselves and won't answer my request, heavily redacted FOIA documents revealed that before the executive order was published, a career SES employee at VA questioned whether it was in veterans' best interest for VA to be a voter registration agency. And I'll quote from this email. We have a request from the 10th floor for us to take a look at voter registration and the impact operations in the medical center, end quote. The 10th floor refers to the office of the secretary. The email concludes with the following, quote, wanted to check in and confirm that VHA's thoughts on this have not changed. In other words, VA does not want to be a voter registration agency, as it would divert personnel and resources from the mission of providing care to veterans, end quote. I want to thank that VA employee who did the right thing and spoke up. Sir or madam, you took the words right out of my mouth. The response to this email was redacted, and the VA has repeatedly refused to fully explain themselves. However, the evidence shows staff has had the same concerns about VA being a voter registration agency as former Secretary Peake. But this time, they were overruled by executive order and politicals on the 10th floor because VA is now a voter registration agency. But that's might be a problem there because there's only one place, only one place, and only one state where it's being done. But only in the state of Michigan. So I question why Michigan is a VA's focus despite having the fourth highest percentage of registered voters as a share of the voters' population in the 2022 election. Hardly a state that is lagging in its voter registration numbers. Michigan is, of course, a crucial swing state in the 2024 election. But VA isn't doing voter registration in all of Michigan. Now, VA is only registering voters in Saginaw and Detroit at facilities that cater to veterans living in the swing counties that have historically determined whether Michigan will go red or blue in the November election. So let me put a finer point on it. If you look at a map, VA is not focusing on registering veterans to vote in General Berkman's district of the state, or in northern Michigan, or that's in northern Michigan, or the west side of the state outside of Grand Rapids. Now, why is it that the Biden-Harris administration think veterans don't deserve access to the same voter registration resources as veterans living in the southeast Michigan? Michigan also happens to be the only state that the Small Business Administration is partnering with as well. It doesn't take a political scientist to figure out and understand why I would question about the arrangements and why it's happening. So I welcome a reason and a fact-based explanation for why VA is implementing this executive order in this manner. That's why I've sent the many letters. I have not got any answer back. But that's why I've asked 3 times the results of the 2022 survey that was collected, that did collect data from veterans to help VA decide how to implement the executive order. And VA told veterans who filed the survey that they would use the data to, and I quote, inform congressional legislation and budgets, end quote. After repeatedly asking for the survey results and VA's strategic plan, and an explanation of why VA picked Michigan and other documents relating to the executive order, VA has refused to fulfill these requests or offer an explanation for why they can't or won't provide the committee with this information. As a result, VA and, in large part, the White House actions are will not reasonably explain what the political motivation is. Registering, and I want to say this very, very clearly, and I'll say it twice to make sure you understand. Registering eligible voters, including veterans, and participating in the election process is a good thing. Registering eligible voters, including veterans, and participating in the electoral process is a good thing. But this is about the politicians directing federal resources for their own benefit in one specific part of the country at the expense of veterans. For anyone out there watching this or sitting in this room who have ever waited too long for VA health care or wondered why it is such a frustrating process to get your benefits, understand that there are people in this town who view VA as a political tool, and it appears to me that they care more about the political motivation than they do of the concerns that our veterans have and providing the services to our veterans. This is concerning, And that's why I'm moving forward with the subpoena. And at this time, I would like to ask if any other members wish to comment. Mr. Ranking Member.
Mr. Chairman, before I begin my comments, I'd like to recognize that today is World Suicide Prevention Day. And I'd like to say to everyone who may be watching this hearing, if you or someone you know is a veteran who needs help, dial 988 and press 1 for the Veterans Crisis Line. The crisis line is available 24/7 every day, and you are not alone. Again, dial 988 and press 1. Well, good morning and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Prior to our January 11th vote to authorize a subpoena regarding documents in the committee's investigation into sexual harassment at VA, this committee had not voted to issue a subpoena since 2016, when I held the gavel during the last 2 years of the Trump administration. This committee did not issue a single subpoena. There were plenty of occasions we could have issued subpoenas for the sake of performance over real oversight, but we chose to put veterans over politics. We relied on the independence of the Inspector General to thoroughly identify and investigate wrongdoing, and we chose not to interfere with ongoing investigations to score press and media hits. Yet now, the Republican majority, this Congress, has threatened to subpoena VA on at least a dozen occasions for its supposed failure to comply with the majority's impossible requests. This severely cheapens this committee's oversight authority. Now, we have been through this exercise several times before under the current majority, and this script is highly predictable. The chairman makes a vague, onerous, and overly burdensome document request of VA with a purposely unmeetable deadline. VA produces documents in response to the request. The majority doesn't like the answer they receive, screams that VA failed to meet their unmeetable deadline, and then threatens to, or in this case goes through with, issuing a subpoena to compel VA to produce documents they don't have, are already trying to produce, or have already produced. The question we must ask is why we see such temper tantrums from our current majority. It is not out of an earnest desire to acquire information and hold VA accountable for its failings. No, clearly it is not. Rather, this subpoena resolution and frankly the hearing that will follow is a red herring to distract veterans from the truth that this Republican majority has absolutely nothing to show for its time in charge other than chaos, dysfunction, and paranoia. I hope the veterans who are watching this hearing see the subpoena for what it is, an anti-democratic and purely political effort to stoke conspiracy theories and ultimately suppress efforts to help veterans and their caregivers vote. So why does the majority want to suppress the votes of veterans and caregivers? We should all want veterans and caregivers to be able to vote. With how much control elected officials wield over veterans' health care and benefits, the stakes are enormously high for veteran voters, and their voices should be heard. It is dumbfounding to me that my colleagues would take issue with veterans exercising their right to vote, a right they served and fought for and sometimes died to protect. The Heritage Foundation, the same organization responsible for Project 2025, is using the Republican-led committees across Congress to suppress voter access. They have literally published a public-facing memorandum outlining strategies to frustrate efforts to encourage Americans to exercise their fundamental right to vote. But what makes this subpoena particularly weird and confusing is that its underlying premise is that VA should not promote veterans' access to voting, though it had been VA policy to do so since the Bush administration. This policy was most recently renewed during the Trump administration. Now, I want to say this again. This policy has been in place since the Bush administration, and it was renewed under the Trump administration. So it is not a radical departure from VA policy. Even weirder, the law underpinning this policy and President Biden's executive order has been in place for 30 years. The National Voter Registration Act explicitly allows states to request that federal agencies or non-governmental agencies accept the designation as a voter registration agency. Now, pursuant to this law, VA is partnering with the state of Michigan to be a voter registration agency, but VA has considered partnerships with Kentucky, Georgia, Hawaii, Pennsylvania, and Nevada to help veterans access the polls. Yet the majority is insistent that VA's efforts constitute electioneering or in some sort of partisan political effort to affect voting in swing states and districts. How is registering veterans to vote, no matter where they are, inherently partisan or political? Through a partnership with Michigan, VA is providing registration assistance to veterans in very limited circumstances when processing a change of address or during a public contact team appointment. VA employees were given training by state officials, which included a review of prohibited partisan political conduct while assisting veterans with registration as required by law. If my colleagues were so concerned with states and agencies following the letter of the National Voter Registration Act, why aren't they spending their time repealing that act? Instead, my colleagues are attacking VA for helping veterans register to vote. They are making a mockery of the committee's subpoena authority to the most anti-democratic end I've ever witnessed on this committee. And I'm frankly appalled that they have decided to go to these lengths to serve their political aims. This is not congressional oversight. This is voter suppression. In the hundreds of documents VA has already produced for the majority, there is nothing to indicate that VA has violated the law in any way. The only thing I'm concerned about in terms of VA actions here is why they are not doing more to register veterans to vote. Later this week, Congress is voting on the SAVE Act, which requires proof of citizenship before registering to vote in federal elections. The majority has no credible evidence that foreign citizens are voting in federal elections. In fact, this is already an illegal practice. But this majority has proven that it will never be deterred by facts or evidence. So it is no surprise that they are going to plow forward with this bill. I'm opposed to it, and I will be voting no. But what's shocking is that in their rush to block people from voting, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have decided that blocking veterans from voting is just as important as blocking undocumented immigrants. This subpoena is a gross and obvious effort to stifle veteran voter registration. This is voter suppression. But again, it is also a red herring, a distraction from the majority's inability to lead, their inability to govern, and their inability to accomplish anything meaningful for veterans. I certainly do not have veterans banging on my door demanding to know why VA is helping veterans register to vote. However, I do have service members stationed overseas contacting my office saying that they need better access to voting, an issue that I'm working on. I also have veterans and their providers asking me what our plans are to ensure VA has the resources it needs to continue delivering health care and benefits to those who have earned them. So I must ask, who does this majority serve? Veterans or Project 2025? I also must ask, to what end is this exercise? I have yet to see my majority colleagues produce any legislation that actually addresses the issues we've spent countless hours of committee time considering in hearings to help improve VA. All I have seen is wasted time on deeply flawed bills that have no outlook for becoming law because they are Project 2025 pipe dreams that will do nothing to actually improve VA or help veterans. Mr. Chairman, using the subpoena authority of the committee to investigate conspiracy theories is beneath us and should never be considered. The committee must hold itself to the highest possible standard because abuse of the subpoena for political gain, especially when it implicates fundamental constitutional rights, is a very real risk. By fear-mongering and stoking conspiracies that VA is doing something nefarious by registering veterans to vote, my colleagues are showing how little they trust veterans to actually exercise their right to vote. But I will say to veterans, I know how smart you are and that you will see through the majority's partisan efforts, and I know how powerful you are as a voting bloc. I have seen it and felt it. It is important for everyone to participate in the electoral process, including veterans. And I encourage my colleagues to vote no on this subpoena resolution, and with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. General Berkman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the committee staff for their months of work on this important issue, especially for the state of Michigan. I wholeheartedly support efforts to improve voter registration and participation, especially among our veterans and their families. As I tell many of the constituents that I meet with, I don't care who you vote for, as long as you vote. I'm proud to represent the district that had the highest voter turnout last election, with nearly 390,000 voters showing up at the polls in 2022. However, when federal dollars and employees are involved in voter registration, full transparency is an absolute necessity. And much of the VA's implementation of Executive Order 14019 has raised red flags to those of us on the committee. This VA voter registry program is seemingly focused entirely on a key swing state, with sites exclusively placed in heavily Democrat voting areas and administered in cooperation with a Michigan Secretary of State that has been vocally opposed to one of the current presidential candidates. Any appearance of potential political bias must be thoroughly examined and explained so that we can be certain that public resources are not being used for partisan gain. There are several critical questions that remain unanswered despite the committee's work and requests for information so far. Number one, why was Michigan the only state selected for this program? Number two, why has VA voter registry sites only been rolled out in Detroit and Saginaw and not in facilities like Iron Mountain up in the Upper Peninsula? Number three, how are VA employees being trained in communicating with voters? And lastly, and just as important, are these new operations at all hindering VA's ability to deliver care, quality care to Michigan's veterans? The documents being subpoenaed today are critical to answering those questions. I'd also like to point out that this step would not be necessary if VA or the Michigan Secretary of State had been forthright in their responses to the committee. Put simply, if there's no cause for concern, then show us. Or said a slightly different way, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, there's a pretty darn good chance it's a duck. Don't call it a goose. Michiganders and the American people deserve certainty, which can only be done and accomplished with transparency from the VA. I urge my colleagues to support the resolution, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does anyone else seek recognition? Sure.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is something that's come up in committees across this Congress, this subpoena, pursuing subpoenas to get into voter registration efforts. It's deeply disturbing, and I do wonder if the majority would step back for a minute and hold off on the subpoena, or join us in saying to the VA, look, this is great. We want to see veterans registered. We want to see the VA register as many veterans as humanly possible. They tried to partner with other states, as I understand it. Let's figure out a way to work together to make sure that other states are joining in, and it's not just Michigan. But this is a quintessential moment. Let me back up. This is a very important moment for our democracy. And I do believe that all of us agree that voting is critical, that registering people to vote is critical. As we all know, nobody asks when they're registering people to vote who they're voting for or their partisan affiliation. I've checked the Michigan voter registration form. It's the same as ours in Ohio. It asks for basic information, name, number, address, those kinds of things. It does not say who you're voting for. It doesn't, ask you to say, whether you're a Democrat or Republican or anything like that. It's just asking anyone who's in contact with anyone, whether it's the VA or When I was at City Hall, we were asking our rec centers and no matter what neighborhood they were in, you know, encourage people to vote. We want to enfranchise everybody. We want everyone to participate. The stronger our democracy is, the better, period. And the more people that vote, the better, the stronger our democracy. And I really think it's a bad idea to issue a subpoena asking the VA to get into why they're helping register veterans to vote, or making sure their veterans are registered to vote so that their votes are counted. It's a bad idea in that most people will see it for what it seems to be, which is voter intimidation. This idea that we're going to scare folks at the VA or at the SBA, because we did this in the SBA or whatever agency. We're going to scare public employees away from encouraging veterans to ensure that they're registered. That's what it'll look like to a lot of people. And I think there's enough folks here to say, like, hey, let's take a deep breath, let's take a step back. They don't have to issue subpoena, have the VA secretary come back in and, you know, say what happened in Kentucky, why did they say no, what happened in the other states, why did they not partner, what can we do as representatives from these states to get every single state to partner with every VA and have a competition. See how many VAs that we can get on board, have a competition to see how many VAs or which VA can get as many veterans registered to vote as humanly possible. That's a wonderful thing to do for our veterans so that they are helping to decide the future of the country. That's a different path and one I encourage the majority to take. Thank you.
Dr. Milmix.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had no intention in speaking on this, but first and foremost, every single person on this dais has been sworn an oath to protect the Constitution and to uphold the Constitution. And the last time I checked, states have the authority to conduct elections, not the federal government. It is the provision of the states. If, in fact, you want the federal government to participate in the election process, then pass a law, not an executive order. I don't recall having a vote come up when the minority party was in the majority in 2021 and 2022, asking for the federal government agencies to participate in conducting voter registration, number one. Number two, I heard the ranking member say that the majority party here is trying to block illegal immigrants from voting. Is it not a felony for illegal immigrants to vote? And should not every single person who has sworn an oath to protect the Constitution and defend it, shouldn't we all be trying to prevent illegal aliens from voting? With that, I yield.
Representative, which one? Sheplis McCoring, you're recognized.
Thank you so much. Just to that comment, I just want to make it clear, illegal immigrants are not able to vote. And what this is about is to make sure our veterans who have sacrificed their time, their life, their family, actually are being aware that they need to just register to vote. And as our colleague mentioned, there is no line that says what party you're voting for, and we would love to have more cities, more states participating in it to make sure that everyone is actually being registered. So I do think that this is misplaced for the subpoena. We should be looking at how do we expand and make sure that all of our veterans are actually participating within the system that they actually swore to protect and defend. And we do have a constitutional obligation, and that constitutional obligation is to make sure our veterans have a seat at the table and they can articulate their God-given right to vote. So I do think that this subpoena request, this hearing, or this business is actually misplaced. And we shouldn't be making it partisan, but looking at how we can actually expand it. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman and Representative Self.
Just a couple of comments. First of all, thousands of illegal immigrants are being removed from state voter rolls as we speak across America. And secondly, just a quick story. During the August work period, I was handed something from something called the Voter Participation Center, and this goes well beyond the VA, because the Voter Participation Center in Texas, and I realize Texas is not being addressed here, it was filled out, completely filled out. All it required was a signature of a 16-year-old high school girl. I'm concerned with the basis of who they are partnering with across America, to include Michigan. I question the very organizations because they all kind of have a voter participation in their title, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Representative Ramirez.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to yield for 30 seconds to my colleague here to the right, and then I'll go back.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I just want to clarify a couple things. One is that if an illegal immigrant or somebody here, undocumented immigrant, somebody here who's not here legally, but the language is important because it's so demeaning and unnecessarily disparaging. Just talk about folks that are here either legally or not, but if they are undocumented, they can't register to vote. They can't vote. It is illegal to vote. You all know that. It is already the law. Now, here is the part that gets me. If they are, and I'm sorry, you only gave me 30 seconds, I apologize. If all of think about this, why would they try to go register to vote? You know what would happen if they tried to go register to vote? They go home. No one is trying to do this. No one is trying to do it. But the larger point here is that we want to enfranchise as many veterans as we possibly can. This isn't about running elections. That's not even remotely close to what folks are trying to do. Everyone should be trying to register as many people as humanly possible, every veteran in every state, period. That's it. I yield back.
Thank you. You yield back to me, right? Yeah. So now I had to cut my remarks here. I mean, I think we're clear here. Non-citizens cannot vote in elections, and since we have proven that over and over, now you're coming for veterans, U.S. citizen veterans, by the way, who should be voting. This subpoena is the opposite of serving our veterans. It is in direct contradiction of delivering better outcomes for these communities. I agree with Ranking Member Takano here. This subpoena is just another tactic to use veterans as political pawns, to spew misinformation, which is what we do here all the time, and to suppress veterans' right to vote. Every veteran and caregiver deserves, every U.S. veteran and caregiver deserves access to voting, and it's anti-democratic and an attack to diminish efforts that expand voting access for our veterans. I mean, look, I echo my colleagues here and I ask, instead of coming after places that are helping our veterans get registered to vote, why are we not asking, how do we make sure this happens in every single state and across the board? Why are we not doing more to register our veterans to vote? Why are we not doing more to ensure veterans are meaningfully engaged in our civic process? Why are my colleagues on the other side of the aisle intent on serving dark political interests rather than serving our veterans? Our veterans deserve better, and frankly, we owe it to them to do better. I look forward to working with our ranking member and hopefully all members of this committee to better support veterans and caregivers in how they choose to exercise the right to vote. I will not be supporting the subpoena or any voter suppression tactic, and I yield back.
Representative Van Orton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just got back from my district. That's the 3rd congressional district of the state of Wisconsin. Big ag district. Spent a lot of time in dairy barns, and be honest, I didn't think I would smell manure like that here in DC, but thanks to a couple of my colleagues, I have, because this is just foolish. The ranking member said that he trusts veterans to make sure they understand what's going on and to make the right decisions. He himself is a veteran. Jen Kiggins is a veteran. Morgan is, I am, Scott is, Marionette is, Jack is. Every single veteran, and so is the chairman. Sorry about that, Semper Fi, Marine. Every single veteran here present says what you just said is manure. All of us. So if you trust veterans, trust us, sir. And we're telling you what you're saying is a lie. And what you just said, ma'am, is a lie. And Mr. Landsman, awesome, first 5 minutes, and then you just went right into the can. Okay? You told the truth. You was very thoughtful. I appreciate it. I paid super attention because what you're really asking solid questions. I appreciate that. It's a colloquy, right? We're here to convince people with the power of our rhetoric. And you did that, and then you lost the bubble. So we're not doing this. I fought for your freedom, Mr. Tucano. I've had 50 of my friends killed for your freedom, Mr. Tucano. I've had 21 of my friends commit suicide because they couldn't bear the burden of fighting for your freedom, sir. And for you to sit here and lecture me that we're trying to suppress the vote is disgraceful. There's no other way to describe that. We don't want to suppress the vote. What I'd like to know from you, sir, what's the PVI, the Cook Political Voting Index, of where you're going to put these stations? What is it? Do you know? You don't. You know why? Because your staff wrote that brief that you just told us about. Just read a brief that a staff wrote for you. It's not how this committee is supposed to be comported. That guy right there, Mike Levin, I respect him tremendously. He never would have said some of that junk that you did. So I'm doing this to you VA people. I represent Toma VA Center. I am offering and extending a formal invitation to the Veterans Affairs Administration to put one of your voter registration booths in Toma, Wisconsin, which is as red as the Marine Corps flag. Do that and we'll stop talking. Until then, you're done. I yield back.
Gentlemen, yield back. Anyone else seeking recognition? Seeing Mr. Kennedy. This is probably something you really want to speak on the very first thing out.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, this may be my first day on the committee, Mr. Chairman. It's not my first rodeo. And, you know, the stink I think my colleagues smell is coming from the other side of this room. Look, we all are on this committee for a reason, to take care of our veterans and those that have sacrificed for our country and the families that sacrifice each and every day to protect our country. And we owe it to them to be better than the disgraceful name-calling debate that's happening on this day as today. And I would ask, Chairman, to strike 2 lines from my colleague across the aisle calling our colleagues on this side of the aisle lies. I think it's important that we have an honest debate about what's happening here. And I think what the ranking member Tucano stated is very clear, that there hasn't been a subpoena since 2016 on this committee. That's now 2 different presidents, 8 years. And what we're looking for here is a conversation about expanding voter access for our veterans. This wasn't one state that was uniquely chosen. This was open to many states. What we are asking for is that this be expanded. We're looking for, regardless of political stripes, for every single veteran to have the opportunity to be registered to vote. And quite frankly, to make it easier for them to vote by having access when they go to get the care that they've earned and they deserve at the regional VA. So Michigan took it upon themselves to pilot a program, 2 different areas of the state. It can be expanded. It ought to be expanded. And I think everyone on this side of the aisle agrees with that. It sounds like my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would agree with that as well. I would ask, before we waste the time of this committee any further, that we consider tabling this subpoena, have a real conversation about how we can expand voter access for veterans and, quite frankly, veterans' families across America, in every state, in every region, in every political stripe, and have an honest debate about how we can actually do that. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, be recognized, please. Mr. Kennedy, thank you. I would be more than willing to strike from the record the 2 lines where I called my colleagues say that they were lying. I apologize for that. On the 2 conditions. Every member of this committee is issued a floor plan of the Cannon office building and a watch so that they can show up to a committee hearing on time.
Anyone else? Mr. Stout?
I'm not sure how we got distracted here.
Yeah, because this is not, this conversation has went way far away from what the actual subpoena does.
Yeah, we're talking about expansion here. Y'all are distracting us with expansion. The Biden administration has put this in blue areas. That's what we're concerned about, and I yield back.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment about Mr. Van Orden. We've had a good relationship, and I think most of our counterparts here, we've had very good relationships. And we can all acknowledge that voting has been difficult throughout the United States for most citizens. Even when we look at my great state of Florida, where we have over 900,000 voters who are now inactive, who aren't aware of it. And what's unfortunate is in our great state of Florida, we have some of the largest number of our veterans who are not aware that they have been marked inactive. And so it is highly concerning that we make sure that our veterans do have the opportunity to know what's going on and have that simple process. So I do find it offensive that you called us liars, because we were stating what the law is and what most people do, but I also find it disheartening. Disheartening that we will politicize this process, as I mentioned earlier, and at the end you said you wanted to have it in your district, which we welcome. And I welcome having this program in Florida, which most people believe is red. We welcome that. And just because I have not served this country like you guys do and have, doesn't mean that I don't care sincerely about our veterans. My father-in-law and all his brothers served in Vietnam. We took care of them to make sure they got the help they need. We fought for them to make sure they got the help they need. This is something that's very sincere to my heart. So to say that because we haven't served, that we're not as committed is insulting. It is deeply insulting. And so we serve on this committee as a team, as partners, to make sure that our veterans get the best help they need and what they deserve. And so I would appreciate if we can keep a standard of decorum, a standard of relationship, so we can serve our country and our veterans the way we've promised. Thank you. I yield back.
Anyone else seeking?
I would be nice, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, he's spoken like 2 times already.
I got it.
I would like some time to speak, and I'm going to yield some time to general
Mays.
program when I'm done.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
May I speak?
You may.
Okay, I'm going to yield my last minute or two to the general next to me. I find it deeply ironic here that some of my colleagues are saying that we lacked decorum when literally the ranking member said we were throwing a temper tantrum this morning because want to issue a subpoena. I find it ironic when the ranking member called us conspiracy theorists. I got to tell you right now, no one on this committee went to Project 2025 and said, hey, what are we doing today at 10 a.m. or 10:15 a.m.? That is not a thing. That is a conspiracy theory that you all on the left, the radical left, continue to espouse, and it's just not true. And here we are, you all are dividing, being very divisive in your comments today. You're saying we're putting politics over veterans, when you all are literally doing the thing that you're projecting, you guys are actually doing. And it is insulting to veterans. It is insulting to every member of this committee to sit here and come in here and tell us just because we're issuing a subpoena
that we're throwing a temper tantrum. The federal government has no business being a political arm. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is an executive order. This is a fact. We deal in facts and not fiction on this committee. And I am deeply insulted that as you all espouse, oh, let's not be divisive and let's have decorum, and this is deeply insulting when you guys are literally throwing adjectives around at us and saying that we're the ones that are crazy and when we are not. We're dealing with facts here and real information. And to see members of this committee put politics over veterans, we should be helping every single veteran in this country who do have access to register. They do have the ability to vote. They can vote in every single election. Yet it's my colleagues against the aisle, on the other side of the aisle, that will vote down a measure like the SAVE Act to ensure only citizens vote in U.S. elections. It is my colleagues across the aisle that don't want to vote for and support voter ID in this country to ensure only citizens are voting in our elections. And so the hypocrisy is real. I'm having none of it. I'm going to yield the rest of my time to the general, please.
I'm recognized. Well, I would like to associate myself with a comment, one of the comments made. You'll know why in a second. I was raised by a Minnesota farm girl, and I'm married to an Iowa farm girl. So on a hot August day, I can tell you the difference between pigs, chickens, cows, whatever, just by that aroma that I see in the fields that I grew up in, okay? Now, having said that, we are here, and this resolution is about, for one reason, why only Michigan, and more finitely, why only Southeast Michigan? And I yield.
Mr. Levin.
Well, I just wanted to first say that I respect everybody on this committee, and I think that I hope everybody here wants to put veterans over politics. That's why we serve on this committee. I will say, I think if anything untoward is happening, we all want to get to the bottom of it, I hope, and find out without fear or favor if there are things that need to be explored. That being said, it's my understanding after speaking with our staff that VA had agreed to provide all of VA's communication with Michigan and any other state pertaining to this matter, whether it's about voting or copies of any relevant information. That compromise was discussed and was rejected, which I find unfortunate. I think it's important to just explain that, and you can take it or leave it, but I think that's an important fact, not in evidence to this point, and I'll yield back.
Can we stop?
Yes, I will be very nice too. This is okay.
Very quickly.
Hopefully.
Because I think I can clear some things up here whenever I...
No problem. I do want to just focus on the expansion piece because Mr. Van Orden, the idea of putting a booth in the Tomaha, Wisconsin VA, all in, this is what we should be working on. I mean, I do appreciate your comments that the first 5 minutes it was, let's have a dialogue, okay. Let's talk. But I do want us...
You've been given 3 times.
Yeah, this is an important debate. I mean, I understand, Mr. Chair, you want to move on, but like this is, and I know you guys have something to do, whether or not our veterans are getting help across the board in terms of, including registering to vote is really important. I think the subpoena is a mistake. I do. I think this is a very bad mistake. However, I'm saying we should work together to expand. Thank you, and I yield back.
All right. As the chairman, I'm going to cut this off. And here's what I'm going to say. One thing I agreed with on Van Orten is that if everybody was here on time, you would have heard my opening statement. And in my opening statement, if you would have been here and listened, I stated that in my remarks that registering eligible voters, including veterans and participating in the election process, is a good thing. Now, in response to this subpoena and why we're doing it, this committee has subpoena power, as does every committee in this Congress. To the comment that we don't do this on a regular basis, we don't do it on a regular basis because normally we get the answers to us so that we can make our decisions of oversight. The reason that, and I'm going to explain this, I don't know what your staff heard, but I'm going to tell you what my staff was told. Their feet were being drugged, they were not giving us the information, and we have asked for it for 3 months, and that's why we're bringing it forward, and as chairman, that's my responsibility to do that. As far as incurring and blocking anyone from voting, I do want everybody to vote. Once. I come from Illinois, sometimes they vote several times. And I want them to be alive, but that's a whole different story. Let me also say this. There's been a lot of rhetoric thrown back and forth here. The real issue is we are requesting information from an agency because we are the oversight committee of that agency. And when we ask for that information, it should be sent to us so that we can make decisions. And also, in response, trust me when I tell you what we're doing here is not a temper tantrum. If you want me to show you a temper tantrum, you simply have to have a video, and you can play the one that I threw on the Illinois House floor years ago. It's entertaining, to say the least. It's about 90 seconds, and it's well worth a watch. But this, and the argument that we're having right now, has to do with the fact that an agency is not providing us the information. Therefore, with no amendments, any other amendments were filed, does any member wish to offer an amendment to the resolution? Hearing none. I now recognize Representative Berkman for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee approve the resolution to issue a subpoena to the Department of Veterans Affairs to obtain the documents and communications specified in such resolution.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. In the opinion of the chair, I will request a roll call.
Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye. Mr. Adewagen. Mr. Adewagen. Mr. Bergman. Aye. Mr. Bergman, aye. Ms. Mace. Ms. Mace, aye. Mr. Rosendale. Aye. Mr. Rosendale, aye. Dr. Miller Meeks. Aye. Dr. Miller Meeks, aye. Dr. Murphy. Yes. Dr. Murphy, aye. Mr. Franklin. Aye. Mr. Franklin, aye. Mr. Van Orden. Aye. Mr. Van Orden, aye. Mr. Luttrell. Mr. Luttrell. Mr. Siscomani. Aye. Mr. Siscomani, aye. Mr. Crane. Mr. Crane. Mr. Self. Mr. Self, aye. Ms. Kiggins. Ms. Kiggins, aye. Ranking Member Takano. No. Ranking Member Takano, no. Ms. Brownlee. Ms. Brownlee. Mr. Levin. Nope. Mr. Levin, no. Mr. Pappas. Mr. Pappas. Mr. Mervan. Mr. Mervan. Ms. Sherfless McCormick. Ms. Sherfless McCormick. Mr. McGarvey. Mr. McGarvey, no. Mr. Mears. Mr. Mears, no. Mr. Landsman. Mr. Landsman, no. Ms. Bazinski. No. Ms. Bazinski, no. Mr. Kennedy.
No.
Mr. Kennedy, no. Mr. Adewagen. Mr. Adewagen. Mr. Luttrell. As not voting. Mr. Luttrell, aye. Mr. Crane. Mr. Crane. Ms. Brownlee. Ms. Brownlee. Mr. Pappas. Mr. Pappas. Mr. Mervan. Mr. Mervan. Ms. Sherfless McCormick. Ms. Sherfless McCormick. Mr. Chairman, the vote is 12 yeas and 7 noes.
There are 12 yeas and how many noes?
7.
7 noes. The resolution is agreed to, and the motion reconsider is laid on the table. And this concludes our business meeting for today, and we will allow our witnesses to come to the table, and we will start with the regular hearing. committee will come to order. Before we get started, I want to ask unanimous consent that Representative Obernolte and Representative Crow be able to sit at the dais and participate in questioning. Hearing no objections, so ordered. Throughout this Congress, this committee has conducted rigorous oversight of the Biden-Harris administration management of VA. It is our bipartisan responsibility to make sure VA is properly serving veterans, period. We have investigated leadership mismanagement, misconduct, and ineffectiveness at medical centers across the country. This includes Aurora, Colorado, Hampton, Virginia, Loma Linda, California, Mountain Home, Tennessee, Buffalo, New York, medical centers, among others. The committee has also examined allegations of individual misconduct, including sexual harassment against senior leaders throughout the VA. As I said earlier this year, this behavior has no place at VA, and I will always do my part as the chairman of this committee to put a stop to it. One of the despicable examples for such misconduct are the recent sexual harassment and sexual assault allegations coming out of the Mountain Home, Tennessee VA Medical Center. Employees who work at this facility have outlined at least 3 different instances of alleged sexual harassment or sexual assault that occurred within the facility. If this was not bad enough, the Mountain Home VA leadership allegedly knew about some of the allegations for nearly 6 months, but never intervened. Now, another example of misconduct is a coordinated decision by senior leaders to give critical skill incentives bonuses to nearly every VA central office executive. As chairman, I have also encouraged whistleblowers to expose waste, fraud, and abuse of resources and violations of law and policy. Whistleblowers know when the bureaucracy has lost its way. And that's why my oversight team has spent hundreds of hours talking to them and conducting oversight visits. Now, unfortunately, we've seen a lot of mismanagement and misconduct, a lot of things that should not be happening, a lot of things that veterans and taxpayers expect us to end. And it is these scandals, there is one constant, a complete lack of accountability within the VA. We have seen this administration fail to effectively lead the federal government, and unfortunately, VA is no different. Senior leaders and managers in VA must be held responsible for employees they supervise and the work environment they create. Setting a positive example for employees on how to properly serve our veterans is not optional. But time and time again, when VA leaders and management are inept, commit misconduct, or create hostile work environments, they are never held accountable. Instead, such leaders are left in place and collect a healthy paycheck until Congress, the Inspector General, or the press find out. But even then, offenders usually get shuffled to another office to cause more problems while still collecting the same large paycheck. In one case, a medical center director was moved into a VHA administrative position after being found to create a psychological and unsafe and dangerous workplace. But it gets better. The VA later found this individual routinely engaged in inappropriate conduct that created a toxic work environment in the new office the leader was now moved to. So I asked this administration to help me understand how moves like this make any shred of sense. In another example, a facility director who mismanaged medical providers' clinical performance reviews, which could have led to poor veterans care, was merely reassigned to a cushy VHA office This lack of accountability is not fair to all the others hardworking VA employees, many of which are following our fellow veterans, or those veterans who rely on VA for their care and benefits. I introduced the Restore Accountability Act of 2023 last year to prevent these bad apples from lingering around VA and collecting paychecks from the taxpayer. This legislation would restore the authorities in the 2017 Accountability Act and would allow VA to timely and appropriately discipline employees. Because right now, under the Biden-Harris administration, watching accountability and oversight is non-existent. The lack of VA accountability is happening at VA, the lack of accountability that has happened at VA has completely lost control of its budgets and its IT projects, ballooning by tens of billions of dollars. That includes the digital GI Bill, financial management business transformation, and the electronic health records system. Poor leadership also includes bad management, poor judgment, and lack of transparency. We are seeing this all over VA. And finally, we have the budget shortfalls. Mr. Jacobs has told us there is a nearly $3 billion hole in the disability compensation and education funding. The Biden-Harris administration is demanding Congress bail them out, or veterans benefit payments may be delayed. My friend, Representative Mike Garcia, has introduced a supplemental bill, the Veterans Benefit Continuing and Accountability Supplemental Appropriation Act, and strong accountability measures. And I proudly support and also am a co-sponsor of that legislation. VA has no excuse for failing to budget for the PACT Act, but we must hold the veterans harmless. Dr. Endahall also tells us there will be a $12 billion hole in the health care funding next year. But VA stonewalls us when we try to get to the bottom of it. We got a story that did not add up nearly 2 months ago, and VA refused to provide any more briefings before this hearing to further explain themselves. Now, either the VA estimates are completely unreliable, or the administration presented a dishonest budget request in the spring. We have to find out the truth and press for accountability so this never happens again. This is serious business, and the veterans' well-being is at stake. Now, with that, I would now like to recognize Ranking Member Takano for his opening comments.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to, at the beginning, address the budget shortfall VA faces. When I got the PACT Act signed into law in 2022, I wanted VA to set ambitious goals. I wanted VA to outrun those goals to quickly get veterans into care and connected with the benefits that they are owed. VA succeeded. 1 million disability, actually 1.1 million disability claims approved in 2 years. Hundreds of thousands of new healthcare enrollees. The GI Bill and job training benefits are being used at unprecedented levels to further veterans' education and careers. The budget shortfall is a product of VA's success in implementing the PACT Act. Congress knew VA would need more resources to implement the largest expansion of veterans' benefits in years. And we made a commitment with the Cost of War Toxic Exposure Fund to provide those resources. However, the unchecked growth of for-profit care has exploded over the last 2 years. This has severely impacted budget forecasts post-PACT Act. When the Trump administration implemented new access standards in 2019, which further opened VA healthcare to privatization, I feared that this day would come. I support community care when it's necessary for a veteran to receive timely and accessible care, but we have reached a fork in the road. We have a choice of which way to proceed. one direction, we continue down the path we are on, and VA crumbles under the enormous weight of for-profit healthcare. We enrich the private sector at the expense of the healthcare veterans know and love. In the other direction, we course correct and create an ecosystem in which resources for VA direct care and community care are balanced and seamlessly function to meet the needs of veterans. We have to invest in the staff and infrastructure VA needs to flourish into the future. This is the more difficult path, but it is the one that we must take. Direct care is less expensive and more effective for veterans. When I say direct care, I mean VA care. VA outperforms the private sector in terms of both quality of care and patient satisfaction. A strong VA is what veterans both need and want. The continued unchecked growth of for-profit healthcare will eliminate choice for the millions of veterans who choose VA for their care because it will destroy VA care. There is no turning back from this fork in the road. We must choose now. And I want to work with VA to improve its budget estimates in the future so that we can avoid similar shortfalls and for all of us to take a realistic look at the true needs of the agency. The chairman has accused VA of running its budget into the ground. This shortfall cannot be blamed on mismanagement. This shortfall was caused by the quick increase in veterans now eligible for the benefits they have earned. VHA and VBA are clearly and rightfully more focused on veteran outcomes than cost. And when we wrote the PACT Act, we gave the administration the authority to waive provisions that phased in eligibility. President Biden and Secretary McDonough agreed veterans had been waiting long enough and chose to exercise their authority to accelerate PACT Act eligibility for the hundreds of thousands of veterans who have been denied VA health care for decades. I heard no objections from anybody, from our side or the other side, about this acceleration, both on day one on the bill signing and a year later when they accelerated the cohorts that could become eligible. Nobody objected. Nobody. Now we are hearing a lot of whining about the cost of that acceleration. Should VA not have implemented the PACT Act as quickly as it did? Should VA have stopped enrolling veterans or approving claims when they hit a certain number because that would put them over budget? I fear my colleagues across the aisle are suggesting that we should break our promise and default on our debt to veterans because it just costs too much. My priority as the ranking member of this committee is to ensure VA is where all eligible veterans choose to receive world-class health care. That means fighting for the budget VA needs to grow its staff and address its aging infrastructure. It also means extensive oversight of facilities and programs when issues arise, not just finger-pointing and press releases. However, this is all part of the majority's long game to reduce VA to ruins, which is clearly laid out in Project 2025 as it was in the Heritage Foundation's budget blueprints in 2017 and 2021. And I'll point to the poster behind me. The first step of this game plan is to tell veterans not to trust VA. My majority colleagues have spent almost all of their time in Congress, while they were in control of this Congress, wielding this committee's oversight authority to undermine confidence in VA instead of passing legislation to actually improve it. They issue press releases that slam, bash, grill, and blast the Biden administration, or should I say the Biden-Harris administration, since for some reason they have only started recently adding the vice president to their attacks. How timely. The second step is to starve VA of resources. And as we know, due to the massive success of the PACT Act, more veterans than ever are now enrolled in VA health care. Because of the access standards put in place by the Mission Act, VA needs to keep wait times for appointments low for veterans to receive their care at VA. To push wait times down, VA needs to hire more clinical staff. To hire more clinical staff, VA needs competitive salaries. To be more competitive in the market, VA needs the authority and the budget to pay clinicians what they deserve. But when VHA is spending at least a third of its healthcare budget on referring veterans care into the private sector, those dollars end up in the pockets of providers who sometimes are earning as much as 3 times what VA employees earn. Salary caps are driving clinicians away from VA, and when VA doesn't have the clinical staff needed to see patients, wait times increase, and then VA is forced to send even more care into the community. VA's aging infrastructure also has a direct effect on wait times, and VA is similarly put in the position of choosing between upgrading its facilities, opening new ones closer to where veterans live, or paying for private care, and that cycle of resource starvation continues. The third step in the Republican plan to destroy VA is to privatize more care. My colleagues are intent on opening the aperture to private care even more, to continue the community care eligibility expansion started in the Trump-era Mission Act. Their solution is to always send veterans to the private sector and never to invest in VA employees or facilities. And finally, the cycle restarts. The rinse and repeat. The majority continues its attacks and tells veterans not to trust VA. As has been my concern while sitting through nearly an entire Congress of oversight hearings led by the Republican majority, I fear that we have different views of what accountability at VA is and should be. My colleagues see accountability as the firing of any employee who is alleged to make a mistake, whether the facts are there to support the allegations or not. I submit we cannot fire our way to success, and every employee is afforded the constitutional right to due process. A show trial in this hearing room is not due process. VA employees at all levels bear enormous responsibility for providing care and benefits to veterans, from housekeepers who ensure clean and sterile clinical environments to the claims processors who help veterans receive their earned benefits to the executives who steer some of the largest integrated health systems in the country. Every employee plays a role in achieving VA's mission. Accountability is about treating the challenges VA faces across the enterprise as opportunities. Now, this is not to say that there are not instances of mismanagement or failure to meet the standards we require of those who care for our veterans. In those instances, there are clear processes for investigating wrongdoing and carrying out proper disciplinary action. VA has a host of challenges, as does any organization of its size. And when issues are brought to this committee's attention, we take them seriously. We spend a substantial amount of time on oversight of VA facilities, which is justified and warranted. However, as I stated earlier, the amount of VA's budget supporting for-profit health care has risen significantly, with the VA on track to spend almost 3 times as much on community care as it now did before Trump's Mission Act was implemented. Yet, the Republican majority has not dedicated a single oversight hearing to for-profit health care since they've held the gavel. Not a single oversight hearing on for-profit health care since they've held the gavel. Instead, my Republican colleagues have pushed back and thwarted every attempt at greater accountability for-profit health care. At a time when more veterans get their care from non-VA providers than ever before, it is dangerous for us not to extend our focus on access, patient safety, and accountability to taxpayer-funded care received outside VA. The Government Accountability Office and Inspector General have sounded the alarm in report after report. But this Congress has stood idly by and sent more dollars out to these for-profit healthcare systems without even asking if veterans are getting adequate or timely care, and if this is a good return on the taxpayer's investment. Today, my colleagues are using VA's budget shortfall and other challenges to chip away at the public's faith in the agency. They won't be satisfied until it is merely a shell that pays the bills and nothing more. In other words, they want to voucherize VA healthcare. We are going to spend this hearing, like we have all the others, with loud, screaming demands for people's heads. And where does that leave us? No meaningful change and no solutions from this committee for veterans. I'm going to use this hearing to meet my congressional responsibility, which is to gather information and to use it to develop and improve policies that strengthen VA so that it remains the best place for veterans to receive care, and it is what they are owed. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Cano. And with that, we want to now turn to our witnesses' testimonies. Testifying before us today, we have the Honorable Michael J. Missel, Inspector General of the Department of Veterans Affairs. From the VA, we have Undersecretary Sharif Endahal and Undersecretary for Benefits Joshua Jacobs and Mr. Edward Murray, Acting Assistant Secretary for Management and the Chief Financial Officer. Will the witnesses please rise and stand and raise their right hand? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to provide is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. You may have your seats. Let the record reflect that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Mr. Missel, you are recognized for 5 minutes to provide your opening testimony. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Chairman Bost, Ranking Member Takano, and members of the committee. The Office of Inspector General is committed to conducting oversight work that improves the lives of veterans and their families and ensures that VA is a good steward of financial resources. For VA to be as successful as possible, it must hold its leaders and staff at every level accountable for their actions. My written statement provides details on the foundational elements of accountability that we have identified as a result of our work. Our staff routinely finds breakdowns in leadership, governance, processes, staffing and other infrastructure, IT systems, and quality assurance programs that erode accountability. These breakdowns impede VA's efforts to make certain that all patients receive timely, high-quality health care and that all veterans and other eligible beneficiaries are afforded the compensation and services they are owed. Some of the most concerning examples are found in medical centers. We recently issued a number of reports on the VA medical centers in Hampton, Virginia, and Aurora, Colorado. They serve as case studies on how veterans' care is affected when leaders fail to uphold a culture of accountability dedicated to patient safety and zero harm. The Hampton reports highlight avoidable delays in cancer treatment, failures to conduct quality reviews, and substandard surgical care. The Aurora reports identified leadership failures that created a psychologically unsafe environment that resulted in significant turnover of clinical leaders. In a system as large as VHA, we recognize that mistakes happen. The real test is how VHA leaders at the facility, VISN, and central office levels respond to these mistakes and aggressively work to prevent them from recurring. When leaders act with urgency and transparency and hold themselves and their staff accountable to identified failures, the system can improve for the veterans it serves. We have also recently testified and published reports on quality assurance weaknesses within VBA that affected both beneficiaries and VA's stewardship of taxpayer dollars. Other recent oversight work has spotlighted how leadership failures led to the improper award of $10.8 million in critical skills incentives to nearly every VHA and VBA senior executive working in VA's central office. And next week, OIG staff will testify on the pause of the program integrity tool, which has led to significant financial consequences for VHA and challenges to uncovering fraud, waste, and abuse. When I testified before this committee last year, I discussed the OIG's goal to continue to provide the department with the information and recommendations to not only improve the services, programs, and operations, but also to enhance accountability. Our auditors, healthcare inspectors, and investigators, both criminal and administrative, are conducting the most impactful work possible to achieve this goal. Our findings and recommendations are typically a roadmap for other facilities and offices across VA to assess their own risk and help prevent or correct similar problems or deficiencies that have gone undetected or unaddressed. We recognize that changing the culture of a massive organization takes time and sustained effort. We have certainly seen engaged VA leaders who are trying to enact change and who are responsive to our findings and recommendations. We have also found that the vast majority of frontline staff are dedicated to providing high-quality care and benefits. However, more can be done to ensure that every individual at VA understands their role and responsibility in meeting VA's mission. Such understanding empowers leaders and all staff to take ownership of and responsibility for their decisions and actions. This will help achieve a culture of accountability. Chairman Boss, Ranking Member Takano, and members of the committee, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Bissell. Undersecretary Elna Hall, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, members of the committee, for the opportunity to testify before you today. I'm proud to represent the more than 400,000 dedicated employees in VA's healthcare system. Together, we continue to make historic gains on behalf of veterans. VA is primarily and most importantly accountable for achieving the best health outcomes possible for veterans while being maximally transparent with our stakeholders. I'll start with our accountability to the veteran. Since the historic expansion of benefits under the PACT Act, our commitment has been to enroll as many veterans as we possibly can into VA healthcare because we know that the VA is the best and most affordable healthcare option for veterans and for many other reasons, but most importantly, a veteran enrolled in VA healthcare reduces their risk for suicide. That's why beginning March 5th, we made new groups of veterans eligible for VA healthcare years earlier than required by the law, including every veteran deployed to a post-9/11 mission, regardless of their conditions or service connection. And any toxic exposed veteran, exposed abroad or at home, also qualifies for direct enrollment. We've also held thousands of outreach events over the 2 years since the PACT Act to meet veterans where they are. At our second Vet Fest events this year in Fayetteville, North Carolina, we met Vietnam veteran Danny Cox. Danny came to learn more about toxic exposure screenings and healthcare eligibility. Years ago, Danny's service did not qualify him for VA care, and he didn't have high expectations. So he was, quote, over the moon to learn that thanks to the PACT Act, he is now eligible to enroll. Danny tells us that not only does he appreciate that his healthcare team knows veterans, but that this is going to help his family financially. He now tells every veteran he can to contact their local VA. We've enrolled veterans like Danny at historic levels. Since President Biden signed the PACT Act, more than 740,000 veterans have enrolled in VA healthcare, 33% more than the 2 years before the law was signed. Further, nearly 900,000 veterans saw an increase in their priority group, reducing their out-of-pocket costs, and in many cases allowing them more care options like long-term care and dental care. We're also delivering more appointments to veterans than ever before. We're on track to exceed last year's record and deliver over 130 million appointments by the end of this month. Further, we're exceeding previous records in pharmacy and prosthetics with almost 5% more prescriptions and 10% more prosthetics delivered this year than last. And to prepare for this record-breaking volume of needed care to veterans, we embarked on a historic hiring effort. Despite industry headwinds in recruitment and retention, last year our workforce grew at rates not seen in the last 15 years. This includes increases in critical occupations such as physicians, nurses, medical support assistants, food service workers, and housekeeping aides. We primarily grew in essential frontline jobs for veterans. Hiring more than 60,000 healthcare workers was the right decision to ensure we had the capacity to serve the needs of veterans, not knowing what the PACT Act would bring in terms of new demand. We also placed an emphasis on improving clinical productivity, holding a series of what we called access sprints earlier this year. And over just a couple of months, our teams across the nation made it easier and faster for veterans to access VA care by offering night clinics, weekend clinics, increasing the number of veterans scheduled into appointment slots in daily clinics. And we continue to see the impact today with wait times in the direct care system down for our foundational services of primary care and mental health year over year, despite veterans' historic demand for VA care. Further, we are leveraging every modality of care that we possibly can to open VA's doors wider to get care with us. Since the start of the pandemic, we've seen telehealth episodes triple. Our clinical resource hubs, home-based primary care, e-consults are also up, and I'm happy to report that all visits now have a tele-emergency care service. Finally, our most important report card includes what veterans tell us about their care and, of course, care quality and outcomes. Last week, we were proud to announce that VA hospitals outperformed non-VA in the most recent CMS star ratings for overall hospital quality for the second year in a row, and patient satisfaction for the 9th quarter in a row. Most importantly, veteran trust stands at 92% for outpatient care, which is an all-time high. None of these achievements would be possible without the dedicated work of our leaders. But with any organization of our size, we do not always get it right, and when we don't, we must ensure that the issues are resolved and that we institute changes so that these things never happen again, and that includes, at times, taking accountable actions to remove leadership. But as we've communicated through the last year, despite these changes to exceed the most aggressive expectations, we've delivered all-time records for VA care, and the growth in services to veterans has resulted in a need for additional funds. I look forward to continuing our work with you to improve quality, access, and veteran trust, because there is nothing that is more important. Chairman Boss, Ranking Member Takano, members of the committee, thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you, Undersecretary. Undersecretary Jacobs, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Bost, Ranking Member Takano, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. Over the last 3 years, the more than 34,000 dedicated Veterans Benefits Administration employees, over half of whom are veterans, have vigorously worked to deliver more benefits to more veterans, family members, and survivors more quickly than at any other time in our history. In fact, VBA and its hardworking employees have been performing at an incredibly high level, enabling VA to embark on the largest expansion of veteran benefits in a generation after 2 years of robust implementation of the PACT Act. In the 2 years since the PACT Act was signed into law, VA has delivered PACT Act benefits to 1.2 million veterans and survivors, which equates to a 75% grant rate and more than $7 billion in PACT Act-related benefits. We were able to deliver these long overdue benefits because of the authorities and generous resources provided by Congress, as well as our decision to make all presumptives effective the day the bill was signed into law rather than over several years, to start processing all PACT claims on January 1st, 2023, instead of waiting 18 to 24 months for regulations. Because of the planning, coordination, and months of hard work that went into PACT Act implementation, and ultimately because of the talented and mission-focused VBA colleagues who helped deliver on the promise of a grateful nation. Today, more veterans are receiving their earned benefits than ever before. In fiscal year 2023, VA delivered $163 billion in earned benefits, including $150 billion in compensation and pension benefits to over 6 million veterans and survivors. We also processed approximately 2 million claims, surpassing the previous all-time record set in 2022 by 17%. In this fiscal year, we are outpacing last year's record-breaking rate by nearly 30% and are projected to complete 2.5 million compensation and pension claims this fiscal year. These results and the progress we've made across our education, home loan, insurance, and pension services are a result of a highly motivated and talented workforce. To keep up with the record number of claims received since the PACT Act, VBA has grown its workforce by 35% since October 1st, 2022. We've also achieved an attrition rate lower than the 6-year average. VBA's incredible workforce has exceeded our own aggressive performance targets, and based on new claims projections from June, we've asked Congress to increase the level of mandatory funding by nearly $3 billion, less than a week's worth of payments, to ensure we can pay nearly 7 million veterans and survivors on time on October 1st. Despite performing and producing at such a high level, we aren't slowing down. We're focused on delivering for veterans and survivors while navigating the complications that come with scaling up. And as with any organization, we are not immune to challenges, and we recognize that accountability is critical to our success. We are a learning organization, and that means we will make mistakes. And while a vast majority of our employees are dedicated and committed public servants, there have been instances where the performance of a limited number of employees, including certain leaders, has fallen short of what we expect and our veterans deserve. When issues are identified, we don't shy away from addressing them. Instead, we take action, inform this committee, refer matters to the Office of Inspector General when appropriate, and notify our external partners and media. We also work to correct and learn from any shortcomings. This commitment is essential to building and maintaining the trust of the veterans we serve. We recognize that along with our record-breaking success, there is always potential for improvement. Accountability at VBA starts with me. I own the challenges we face, and I stand proudly behind the incredible work we've done and will continue to do as we eliminate inefficiencies and build on our record-breaking achievements to deliver even higher quality benefits to those we are privileged to serve. Thank you for your continued support of veterans, their families, caregivers, and survivors. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today, and I'm ready to answer any questions you or other members of the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Thank you all for your testimony. We are going to go to questions now, and I will yield myself 5 minutes, which may go over just a little bit, just so you know. Mr. Jacobs, you told us, told us VBA has $1.4 billion in extra resources to pay benefits, but if you are short by even $1 at the end of the month, every veteran's benefits will be delayed. How much more money do you exactly need, and do you need to get through the end of the month?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question. So what you're referring to is the money that as we track our actual spend on a month-by-month basis, we've identified that we don't believe the projections may require us to use all of the funding. But the way that the pay file is structured, if we are even $1 short, we can't pay any veteran because the pay file is constituted by 95% of the veterans and survivors that we serve. So we believe it is prudent to maintain our original request to ensure that there is no risk whatsoever in our ability to pay without delay the veterans and the survivors who rely on those earned benefits.
Okay, so the other part of my question.
Yeah.
How much money do you actually need?
Mr. Chairman, we maintain that we still need the approximately $3 billion for the monthly benefits to be paid on time on October 1st.
All right. You also told us on September 20th that September 20th is the deadline to receive the $3 billion supplemental appropriation from Congress. What happens on the 20th if additional funding is not provided? And don't confuse my question that we're not going to provide it. I just want to know from you.
I understand, and I appreciate your assistance, sir. Every month, on about 10 days before the end of the month, we transmit our pay files to the Department of the Treasury. There are multiple steps that have to occur between us submitting the pay file, the Treasury Department processing it, and those payments being made either through direct deposit through EFTs to financial institutions or to the approximately 2% of veterans and survivors who receive paper checks to print and send those checks. So every day past the 20th increases the risk that we are not able to pay on time. We do have some room built in because occasionally there are challenges with those pay files that we have to fix and then correct before we transmit it. It's very hard to go back and recoup those monies after we've submitted it. I will also add, we have the ability to accelerate the timeline for direct deposit. It does come with additional risk. The real challenge and the real length in process is those veterans and survivors with checks, because that process is time consuming, and particularly for veterans and survivors in rural areas, there may be delay of up to 2 weeks.
Okay, now this is for both the undersecretaries, and this is vitally important. Why did you wait until after both appropriation committees had finished their bills to fund VA to tell Congress about the shortfall?
Congressman, I'll start with VBA. As you know, and we've been communicating, we're delivering more benefits than at any other time in our history. Right. We've been closely monitoring the trends. What happened is during June, during statutorily mandated mid-session review, where we go over our financial trends and the actuals versus those projections, we updated our claims projections. And so we added new assumptions to include updating the number of claims we anticipated being able to complete this year from 2.2 million to 2.5. And it's at that point that we identified the risk that we may need additional mandatory funding. We then worked with the Office of Management and Budget to verify that our assessments were in fact reasonable. And once we did that, we immediately came to notify you of the potential need of those dollars. So we did it as quickly as we had faith in our updated projections.
Dr. Andrell.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. So in our experience, we started the fiscal year thinking that we could get through the fiscal year and meet all of veterans' care needs, was essentially a level number of employees after such a historic hiring year in FY23. And we made every attempt to do that by conducting the access sprints. That's the effort where we scheduled more patients into daily clinics. We offered night clinics, weekend clinics, more convenient options for veterans, and we actually succeeded at delivering many more appointments and reducing wait times. However, we also were faced with decisions on whether we opened up the system even more to get more veterans into care. And we decided, knowing that this could have been a potential budget risk, but we felt it was the right decision to do anyway, to accelerate eligibility for all of the cohorts that would otherwise have to wait every 2 years up to 2032 to get into VA healthcare. Every deployed post-9/11 vet, every veteran exposed to toxins. So on March 5th, we did that, and then we started to see many veterans take us up on it. Now more than 40,000, well over 40,000 veterans from that move alone has enrolled into VA healthcare. So we're well up in both direct care and in community care. And if you recall, when the Secretary testified before this committee and the other 3 committees overseeing the VA, he did say that we were operating under a tighter fiscal picture, and if we felt that we needed more funds to sustain this momentum for veterans and maintain the outcomes, we would come back. So as soon as we came to that determination, we briefed your committee in July, and we hope to be able to get this in the CR as an anomaly in the CR.
Okay. Staying with you, Doctor, because we've asked you and you haven't answered the committee's questions about the healthcare shortfall. You even postponed the key briefing that we were supposed to have last Friday. When I asked your CFO, Ms. Duke, about the shortfall in late July, she said, we are still diving into those costs to see what's driving them. Are you able to explain the reasons exactly for the shortfall? I know you gave a little bit of it then, but and what the exact amount is that we need now?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. So we need to be able to deliver even more care on both the direct care side and in the community care side. We are up about 16.1% on the community care side just over last year. And in multiple categories of care within direct care, 15% up on mental health appointments, 16% up on telehealth, up in essentially every category of care that we are offering in the ambulatory setting. We came to the conclusion that in order to sustain that momentum and keep wait times level or down, and by the way, maintaining our historically high quality and veteran trust outcomes, that we ultimately needed this funding. The other piece of our request is a really unanticipated medical inflation phenomenon in both prosthetics and in medication. In fact, out of the $12 billion, about $3.8 billion of that is just due to the increased costs and volume of delivery of prescription drugs and prosthetics of all types. So that's essentially what goes into the $12 billion that we need.
All right, when we're talking about that $12 billion, the concern that I have, do you believe you've accurately explained to us that the Toxic Exposure Fund, what all it should be paying for? Because we had a problem with what it was paying for, and the Secretary himself actually answered a question last year when we talked about a particular funding of a building, and when we asked why he was using that, he says, because we can. Do you know what it is and why it is that, as you come forward with the $12 billion, and I want to clarify this, and I want it on the record. We're not saying we're not providing it, but our job is oversight. And we want you to implement the PACT Act. But I also have concern, well, I'll let you answer that, and then there's another question I have, and then I will turn it over. Yeah.
You know, Mr. Chairman, I fully respect your constitutional responsibility for oversight, and we're always happy to work with you on how we're using the Toxic Exposure Fund to ensure that it meets congressional intent and be as transparent as possible. So if we haven't been, I apologize for that. We'll definitely keep that cadence with you. We are very confident, Mr. Chairman, that we can use all of the $12 billion that we requested in the Toxic Exposure Fund for direct care to veterans exposed to toxic substances. We've been screening now well over 5.5 million veterans for those exposures, and well over 40% of veterans tell us that they were exposed to a toxin. We have a very specific methodology that ensures we map as accurately as possible to veterans getting care for toxic substances. It is a methodology that we've been transparent and worked with you on. But we know that since this money is going directly into care, including the costs of care, prosthetics, and medications, that we'll be able to use all of it for veterans exposed to toxic substances.
And just real quick, because I need an answer to this question because of some comments that have been made. First off, I don't think there is a Republican one on this dais that wants to privatize the VA. Let me say that again. There is not a Republican one that wants to privatize the VA, okay? But we want to make sure that it is handled correctly, and that we want to be sure that people understand that the VA was not created for the bureaucracy of the VA. The VA was created for our veterans to receive the care that they deserve. If that bureaucracy climbs to a point, it's our responsibility to make sure that the veterans are getting the care regardless of where they get it. Now, I do not believe we're turning down VA in any way, shape, or form, but we are making sure with the community care that they're getting the health care that they need when they need it, not to attack the VA in any way, shape, or form, or change it except for the fact for the betterment of the veterans. With that, I will recognize Representative Ramirez for her 5 minutes plus.
Can I get 30 seconds more too? I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Thank you, Chairman, and certainly Ranking Member Takano for holding today's hearing. I also want to thank the 4 of you witnesses for joining us today. It is certainly an important hearing. And as a member of this committee, I am clear that strengthening our democratic processes and working collaboratively with federal agencies like the Department of Veteran Affairs is critical to ensuring our veterans get the care and the constituents we serve can trust our oversight of agencies and trust the services that we're providing them. Now, there is a difference between oversight, which is the act of working with federal agencies to address challenges and issues that they're facing, and using oversight as a guise to push a partisan political agenda. Today's hearing is another partisan attempt to erode trust in agencies and our power to conduct oversight as a committee. Despite of this, I am ready to address the real issues, and I'm ready to work with the Department of Veteran Affairs to identify the root causes of the problems they're experiencing and to discuss solutions with you so we can move forward and work together for our veterans. With that, I want to turn over to my questions. This year, the VA reached a settlement with AFGE to provide relief to certain employees that were adversely affected by the VA's unlawful implementation of the discipline authority under the 2017 VA Accountability Act. To date, the VA has paid out $106,800,774. Let me read that again, say 100 million to save some time. Over $100 million have been paid out because of violations of employees' rights to due process arising from the unconstitutionality of that Trump law. Despite these massive payouts for Trump-era policies, the Republicans choose to focus on the $11.6 million improperly paid to senior executives through the CSI bonuses, 92% of which has been recouped already. So, Dr. Al-Nahal, does the VHA have the tools and authorities it needs to investigate and discipline employee misconduct?
We believe we do, Congresswoman, and I think you're familiar with the history of the use of the 714 authority and how the courts have rendered it effectively not usable for the purpose that it was intended, or at least no different from the Title V authority tools that we have right now. And so in every situation, Congresswoman, where we have evidence of things like malfeasance, neglect, misconduct, and ultimately need to remove leadership and employees, we do believe we have the authority to do it. And of course, employees have rights, and we have to respect those rights throughout those processes. But we do, in fact, believe we have the tools that we need.
Good. So talk a little bit more about how you address instances of misconduct or mismanagement at the facilities under your leadership.
First thing I'll say, Congresswoman, is that the vast majority of our employees and our leaders, who, by the way, have led us to 750,000 veterans enrolling under the PACT Act, historically high veteran trust. The average outcomes and the typical experience of veterans is better because of our leaders and employees rather than the opposite. But of course, there are instances in which we must undertake an investigation on the quality of leadership. In those instances, we often do temporary reassignments while offices like the Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection or our workforce management colleagues in the healthcare system itself can do a thorough investigation and ultimately determine a recommendation for administrative actions if necessary. But all of that is, of course, consistent with the respect for employee rights under the law, but also our obligation to hold leaders accountable when necessary.
Thank you. And I certainly agree with Ranking Member Takano's remarks that the goal for community care and VA care should be symbiotic relationship, not parasitic. And right now, though, community care is disproportionately draining resources from direct care. And when we hold VA providers to high quality of care standards and we strive for low wait times, we should also be expecting the same from the VA community care providers. When we demand the best technology and infrastructure in our VA facilities, I believe we should also be ensuring that VA patients get that also when they seek care in the community. So my last question for you is, do you feel like you have the adequate authority and tools to perform oversight over community care providers?
Oversight over community care has been a pretty long-standing challenge, Congresswoman. We're trying to use every tool that we can through our contractual authorities to hold our third-party administrators accountable to do so. And we're also trying to have more seamless exchange of health information between our private sector partners and the VA. Increasingly, we do depend on community care more and more for veterans in rural areas, for certain categories of care, like long-term care, where we simply do not have enough institutional capacity. And so this is not to disparage at all our community care providers. We do need them in many cases for veterans. But what we're trying to do with an effort that we call the Interoperability Pledge is partner with our high volume and best partners in the private sector, 13 health systems, to seamlessly exchange information electronically to eventually include quality outcomes and very essentially records of care for veterans that we have to treat in the private sector and come back into VA. So we're always trying to explore new ways to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. It's good to see your familiar faces there at the testimony table. I know you all go to work every day trying to do the right thing for the veterans. I'm going to kind of revert to an old hat I wore in the Department of Defense when I was in the POM process for budgeting within the Marine Corps and budgeting for the Department of Defense, and a hat I currently wear as a member of the Budget Committee and task force chair of oversight of improper payments, if you will. But I look at things from a budgetary standpoint, and we've all heard the old phrase, more money and more people will solve every problem, until it doesn't. It's just the way it is. Was there any type of failure or I'm going to say not mistake, but just something you didn't see in the budget process at the VA that led to this issue not being discovered until just 2 months before disability benefits would start to be cut? Was it an aha moment? What kind of clue me in here?
Congressman, for the last 2 years, we have been performing what I believe is the most aggressive forward-leaning outreach campaign in VA history. We had a 40% increase in the number of claims submitted in 2023 relative to the previous year. We're on the same pace to receive about that many. And our workforce has grown and delivered more benefits than at any other time in our history. Right now, we've already.
No, I got that.
Yeah.
No, but hold on. Because in your statement, what I heard you say was you grew the VA workforce by about 30+%.
Correct.
Did I get that right? Okay, is that the metric, or is the outcome the metric, or can you show that growing the workforce by 30+% was going to lead to the 80% level, this uptick in benefits and services provided to the veterans? Is there some kind of a chart? Because what I saw at the beginning with the sign behind over here it was the classic, it was an appropriate primary color because it reminded me of a red herring. This committee, as the chairman has said, we're charged with oversight. We want to be that partner that helps you deal with whatever, the 80% norm and then the 20% unexpected.
Yeah. So we have a pretty robust model to project the production, both inventory and backlog. And it's comprised, as you would guess, people, process, and technology elements. Within the people element,
what changes the faster, people, process, or technology?
People.
At the higher rate, faster rate of change?
People. Right now it's people. It's about 80 to 85% of our production capacity are existing employees, new employees, and a reliance for many years on mandatory.
Is it retention?
We have higher retention. Ultimately, it's our employees delivering more benefits beyond what were already very aggressive projections. It is a workforce that has continued to grow and to improve and to deliver at rates higher than we actually thought possible.
So as we project forward here, knowing that time moves on regardless of the good or bad things that happen in life, it just continues to move on, can you all project where the next uptick will be positive, or the potential where you see as vulnerabilities to what you're doing that could present a downward trend?
Right now we are, and that's subject to some variables that are outside of our control and some that are within our control.
Okay, so let me ask you a question because I've only got a minute left. Mr. Missel, any thoughts?
Yeah, my thought is that we have already opened a project with respect to looking at VHA's projections. What were the circumstances upon which they've now changed the projection that they have? And we're planning on doing one with respect to VBA to assist this committee in getting answers to some of the questions you have.
Okay, well, and I'm going to yield back just a couple of seconds here. We always expect things happen we couldn't have planned for, budgeted for, but the same thing shouldn't happen twice. And that's what we look for here is how do we take the little things that happened and grow with them. So with that, I'm going to yield back. You got 7 seconds.
I'm a temporary steward of this role. I know at some point I'll be gone. I want this organization to learn the right lessons. I don't want them to learn from this, hey, we should manage to a budget. We should stop the outreach. We should stop processing claims. And so I appreciate the oversight and we'll continue to work with you to get better.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kennedy, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Inspector General, Undersecretaries, Deputy Undersecretary, thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your service to this country and to our veterans. I represent Buffalo, New York, Niagara Falls, the Buffalo-Niagara region. We know that the Buffalo VA hospital has recently had a removal of their leadership. The head of the hospital and the chief of staff have been removed, put in now interim leadership there because of really outrageous actions that are alleged and a lack of care for some veterans. Dr. Ellen Hall, first of all, thank you for taking the time with me this past weekend to discuss what's happening over there and your commitment to rectifying the situation. I know right now there's an investigation that's ongoing. Inspector General Missel, can you just give a timeline on when you expect that to be completed?
Our investigation has been completed, as is our practice. We provided VHA with a draft of the report, which includes the recommendations, and we're waiting to hear back from VHA on their responses to the recommendations.
And so the completion of the investigation and the follow-up will be, what do you expect on that?
As soon as we get it back from VHA, which should be relatively soon, then we'll be able to turn it around and publish the report and then provide whatever briefings to you and your staff.
Thank you. Dr. Ellen Hall, just again, thanks for your leadership. You know, we toured the VA hospital with members of this committee, staff members. You're committed to coming to Buffalo to visit the VA and see firsthand. There's a real crisis of confidence in the hospital system right now based upon the removal of the leadership and the stories that we've heard, a lack of staffing appropriately, what's been deemed as a hiring freeze. From what we've found out is it's a real hiring delay of 9 months, effectively a hiring freeze. We discussed the finances that should be included in the CR in order to not only rectify Buffalo, because I think Buffalo is a real demonstration of what's happening across the nation. Can you talk about what that funding in the CR, what the level you would need to fund our VA hospital staffing levels appropriately, as well as other VAs across the nation for our veterans to receive the care they deserve?
Thank you, Congressman. Happy to do that. And I just wanted to let you know that my personal attention is on making sure that things improve and improve fast at the Buffalo VA. It's what the veterans in your district and around the Buffalo area deserve. I'll first say that the part of the supplemental will support our ability to increase our overall staffing level by about 5,000 employees over and above where we were in mid-June. Now, we've attrited a little bit since then, so that number may change by the end of the fiscal year. But the point is, we would be able to grow responsibly and within the budget to be able to meet growing veteran care needs. And that's exactly what we're seeing in Buffalo and in medical centers across the country. So the inclusion as an anomaly in CR is an extremely important tool for us to be able to do that and maintain within the budget.
The number that's been discussed is $12 billion. Is that accurate from your estimation?
Yes, Congressman, that's the request in the supplemental.
Thank you. So the fact that that's not included in this continuing resolution is a real problem, not just for Buffalo staffing, but for staffing across the nation. But Buffalo being right in the heart of the district that I represent and having these issues, I think it's outrageous that it's not included. Let's talk about moving forward in infrastructure. The hospital in Buffalo, I know it's not alone, but it was built in the 1940s. It opened up in 1950. It's going on 75 years now. Doesn't have proper HVAC system. The building itself is falling apart in many ways while we're putting Band-Aids on it. Thank God for the staff that is working there, that's taking care of our veterans, but they need resources there. We ultimately need a new hospital, a new VA hospital in Buffalo, and we're not alone. We're talking about putting hundreds of millions of dollars into the current VA hospital. We need a new VA hospital that's technologically advanced, that gives our frontline heroes, the nurses, the healthcare practitioners, the resources they need to take care of our veterans. Can you comment on that, what it'll take to get that done, and do we have your commitment to making that happen?
Listen, I agree, Congressman. We've requested in multiple budgets substantially more major and minor construction funding. I look forward to visiting the Buffalo VA with you in the coming weeks to witness myself what the condition of the infrastructure is. But the fact that the average medical center's age of plant is over 60 years, I haven't seen any other health system with infrastructure that old. And so we need to invest in it. I've already contacted our construction and facilities management team, and our team that works on infrastructure will work with you to get it on the priority list to make sure that we address it. It's going to take some time, but my commitment to you is that we'll start that process.
Thank you.
Gentleman, time's expired. Dr. Murphy, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Nalla, I just kind of want to ask you a few things, going back to community care. Somehow, it just is beyond me why this has become a partisan issue where some of our Democratic colleagues just are pejorative about community care. That's how I see patients from the VA where we are. Can you give me an estimate of how much care for the country is delivered by community care?
For veterans.
For veterans.
About 40% of the total care that VA pays for is offered by the community.
Okay, so that's primarily for specialists, correct?
It is really everything, but a lot of specialty care, a lot of long-term care included as well.
And people lament that community care costs so much. Well, specialty care costs more, community or long-term care costs more. And so hence, that's the reason it costs more. Here are some of the problems that I see with community care, because we take it in my office, but we don't get paid. You don't get paid. And you know, guys, when you have a private office, which I don't have anymore, it's kind of hard to keep the lights on. And then I get told by veterans that their VA doesn't want to refer them to community care. And it gets delayed. They wait on a referral, they wait on a referral, they wait on a referral. And in the end, it's 6 months until they get a follow-up. I had the same thing with a woman who had, her husband had a tibial fracture. Months and months and months and months to get referred. So I don't know what the culture is about referral to community care, but it should be absolutely seamless to get our veterans cared for. Number one. Number two, you talked about access to records. You're still on Cerner, right?
Right now, we have 6 medical centers on Cerner, Congressman. The rest is on our homegrown system, Vista.
Absolute disaster of a pick. Cerner should be abandoned today, 6 out of 160 sites after 10 years. Is that correct?
I believe so, Congressman.
Okay, so I'm not going to name the other system, which is much more predominant in the country. So when I log into said system, I can see anybody's record from around the country. And the VA is supposed to send records to me. Zero in 25 years. I have to tell the veteran to go back, physically get their records put on paper and brought to me. You guys need to stop Cerner tomorrow. It is not a system that is meant for the VA, a medical system the size of this. This is a mistake that for 10 years, money has been poured into, and you literally have less than 4% of the whole systems on Cerner now. And its interoperability with other large systems is paltry. This is a huge problem, and why will the VA not recognize they screwed up 10 years ago and fix it today? It will cost an outlay of money, but it will actually deliver care to veterans that need it. What is the holdup with that? Why is the VA not willing to say, we screwed up, we made a mistake, we picked the wrong system, and we move on to a better system?
Well, first thing I'll say is I respect your view on this as a physician, congressman, and somebody who's dedicated to the veterans in your district and across the country. We are dedicated to trying to get this right, and I'll be the first to admit that it has not gone.
It's been 6 sites in 10 years.
The initiative has not gone as it should have been. I fully admit that, and it's been an effort across now 2 administrations to try to get it right. But we are now poised to be able to start deployments again, hopefully within.
What, and add another 5 systems next year? There are 160 sites. This is wrong. You guys, you know, there's a time when you pull the string and say, yep, we made a wrong decision. We need to cut the line and do something different. Because what are we saying? It's going to be another 10 years? That's absolutely wrong. And then every system will be out of date, and it will cost hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, to update this. It is an antiquated system. It cannot fit the VA's needs, and you guys need to change it, period. I actually know what I'm talking about on this. This is not political rhetoric. This is actual physician taking care of patients that the information is needed.
Well, we'll definitely commit to being transparent with you, Congressman, on what we're doing to try to get this right. And again, I'm not belying at all your experience as a physician and a provider. But my commitment to you is to keep you posted on making this better.
Guys, it's just that it demonstrates the inefficiency and the bureaucracy of the VA in not understanding that this is a wrong path and fixing it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Mr. Chairman, before we move on, I'd like to state a point of clarification. It is no longer the Cerner system. It is, Cerner has been purchased by Oracle. So Oracle is replicating and duplicating the exact same mistakes that Cerner did and are continuing to collect billions of dollars. Thank you. I yield back.
Point taken. Ms. Budzinski, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member, and thank you to the panelists for being here today. Dr. Elnahal, in rural America, there are many areas where community care is the only care that is feasible for veterans, and we value the ability of many non-VA providers to fill this critical gap in healthcare access, especially in rural areas like many that I represent. But when veteran patients have to rely on external providers, we should be certain that they are getting the care they deserve and are able to access this care in a timely manner. To me, it seems that the VA has work to do, both inside and outside of the VA, to ensure that both VA and community care providers are working hand in hand, ensuring a seamless experience and a warm handoff for our veterans. So my question for you, what are some of the steps the VA is taking to improve communication and information sharing with community care providers to ensure veterans are getting high-quality care at community care facilities?
Well, the first and most important thing we have to do, Congresswoman, is to make sure that every veteran, when veteran elects and ultimately we decide that the community care option is the next best step, that they get that care as soon as possible. So we've been focusing now, since the 2 years I've arrived, on reducing the time to scheduling into the community with effective care coordination to have a seamless pass-off between our clinical care teams and our community care offices, and to reduce the barriers for veterans to be able to get that care. So that time to get scheduled is still too long. We've reduced it on average by many days, and we're going to continue that effort. That's the first point. The second point is to ensure that we get better at selecting the right providers who have a record of working well with us by sharing records back to veterans. One of the most important frustrations I hear from veterans is that they get care in the community, they come back into the VA, and they realize that the VA does not have a record of what happened. That just cannot happen, and it's happening too much. So we're focusing on innovative ways to do that, and that's part of what we're trying to achieve with the interoperability pledge, which is a way for us to electronically do so seamlessly without having to focus on, fax machines, e-fax, the old way of doing business. The third way we're doing this is through innovative pilots like external provider scheduling. So external provider scheduling is a tool that we're now using in many medical centers. We do plan to expand it. And as long as the community provider commits to connecting with us technologically, which sometimes takes significant effort and costs on their side, it reduces the amount of time it takes to get that appointment scheduled from days, sometimes into minutes or hours. And so what we want to do is perfect it. We want to make sure that we have a system that incentivizes community providers to participate. But that's one really promising effort that we're undertaking now.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. And I have a follow-up question specifically, too, around women veterans who often have limited choices to gender-specific care depending on where they live. This is true whether it's VA care or community care. So could you speak to how the VA is going to ensure our women veterans are getting access to unique care, such as MST treatment or reproductive care, and how Congress can be helpful in that effort?
So fastest growing demographic by far are women veterans. Many post 9/11 generation veterans are women who are enrolling, and so it is our responsibility to make sure that we have the capacity and the respectful and effective care environments to be able to meet all of their needs, and that includes gender-specific care. So we have two main ways we do this. We, of course, have specialists in women's health, so GYN providers, folks who focus on things like gynecology for veterans who are older, postmenopausal therapy. But also we have a training system for our primary care providers, because we know that many conditions can present differently in women. Some of our providers have been in the VA for a long time, and obviously the gender distribution has changed in favor of more women. And so what we're trying to do through our Office of Women's Health, ensure consistent and effective training across as many of our primary care providers as possible. And then, of course, we also put out a rule that allowed for more expansive reproductive health offerings, including abortion counseling and abortion services, where the veteran's life or health is at risk. And so, a lot of things we've done in the last couple of years, we have more to do.
That's great, thanks. I'm going to try to fit in one more question. On this committee, we often urge VA to meet a standard that we know they are able to attain, but are often not resourced adequately enough to do so. We've heard from numerous offices within VA about their budget being cut in order to fund rising community care costs. Though these two avenues of care should not be in conflict, VA care seems to be at the expense of expanding community care access. Can I ask Dr. Murphy, I would like to get your thoughts on this. Do you believe it's possible for the VA to continue meeting high-quality health standards and outcomes while sustaining rising community care costs?
Yes, I'm actually not a physician. I am an accountant. So I do I do work very closely with the administrations on their accounts, budget to plan. They have the ability, we call it transfer authority, to move money between accounts. As one secretary used to call it, you have the money in the wrong pocket. Sometimes you need to move it around. So I do not see any conflicts between the programs. I can pass it to Dr. Elnahal, but I think that we can sufficiently fund the programs, and that I think it's healthy when we transfer funds from one program to another, where their execution variables, one executes hotter than another, we have the funds in one account, not another, and we kind of level set to make sure we can optimize the care and benefits we provide veterans. So no, I have not witnessed anything in that area. Thank you.
I think we're out of time, but thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. We've traded seats around here. I want to thank Ranking Member Takano and Chairman Boss for holding this hearing. And I appreciate seeing you all here again and voluntarily coming in to answer these questions so we don't have to use our subpoena authority. The program integrity tool is what I want to talk about, because that's where we're having some problems with loss of revenue, and loss of revenue is what we're going to be discussing, of course, again next week as well, as we try to fulfill this supplemental that you need. I'm troubled by the fact that the program integrity tool has been offline since February 21st of 2023 due to data integrity and accuracy issues. I'm going to start with Inspector General Missel. Mr. Missel, you estimated that the VA did not collect $665 million in insurance payments and co-pays during the 12-month while Program Integrity Tool was offline. But the Program Integrity Tool has been offline for more than 18 months. Can you estimate the total value of those uncollected fees?
Yes, sir. We project it's about $55 million a month. So the 5 months that were after our work ended would total about $277.5 million and continuing.
Mr. Missel, that's just the missed medical collections. The program integrity tool is also supposed to prevent inaccurate, duplicate, and fraudulent community care claims from being paid in the first place. Over $28 billion of claims were paid in the year that you examined. Can you estimate how much money was wrongly paid out while the PIT has been offline?
We don't have an estimate for that. I think VHA would be in a better position to have any estimate of claims that went into the pit.
Okay. Dr. Elnahal, good to see you again. And I do appreciate all the work that you have done, and I do have to commend you guys for actually, when you identify these problems, as we've seen even at Fort Harrison in Montana, going in and taking action. In one briefing the committee did receive on the VHA shortfall, your CFO, Laura Duke, said that $700 million in medical collections were missed this year because of the Change Healthcare ransomware attack. But she never mentioned the program integrity tool problems. What is the impact of the PIT problems on your budget?
Quite significant, Congressman. It's in the hundreds of millions. We will get to you and to this committee sort of the exact contribution of our collection shortfall between the Change Healthcare issue and the program integrity tool. The IG's report, Mr. Missel's team, was very helpful and informative on the program integrity tool. cannot get that fully online soon enough. We've restarted the program integrity tool. We're at a clip that's faster and hope to get it fully online and in use for collection soon. And then most importantly, to get it also online for the fraud, waste, and abuse monitoring activities that it's critical for. But the one silver lining is that when it comes to collections, we don't actually have a time limit that's going to exceed when this care was provided, meaning we will fall within our authority to collect once everything comes back online. And we are in the process of doing so right now. So once we bring all those collections back in, we will notify the committee, and it's a huge priority for us to do so.
Very good. Dr. Ellenhall, the explanation about the Change Healthcare ransomware attack, though, does not make sense. If $700 million of medical collections should have been captured in the fiscal year 2024 and now will be collected in 2025, how does that contribute to a shortfall in 2025 when it was 2024 revenues or receipts?
Well, I would characterize this, Congressman, not as a budgetary issue, but more of a cash flow issue. Ultimately, the cash in the bank account is lower than we had hoped and expected because of the collection issues between the PIT and the Change Healthcare incident. Now, we're fully back online when it comes to Change Healthcare, thankfully. That was this conduit that essentially, a huge chunk of medical claims payments across the country was going through. The PIT is coming back online for collections, but ultimately it's essential for us to make sure it comes back online and we don't see a decrement again. It's a cash in the bank account issue that is contributing to our need, for example, to eat into the carryover into FY25 this fiscal year.
Okay, and before I surrender my time up, I would like to thank, he's not here, but Dr. Murphy for bringing up once again, the shortcomings of the EHR, the money that has been bleeding out from the VA into that system, and the recognition by everyone sitting here that a change has to be made. And so I do appreciate all the conversations that we've had with the VA about establishing some matrix that Oracle has to abide by in order to keep this moving forward. And I think that we all can agree that that is the best path. Meet the matrix. We have some standards set, and then you continue your compensation. I will now yield back, and I think that Representative Landsman will recognize you for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and the ranking member and all of you. I appreciate you for being here and all your work on behalf of veterans. Dr. Ellenhall, in the case of Hampton, part of the big issue, and this is across the healthcare sector in general, is insufficient staffing and the role that it's played in exacerbating existing issues at VA facilities. So the facility in my district in Cincinnati has faced similar staffing challenges. I've heard directly from a whole host of folks, including the VA nurses, about how these shortages affect their ability to care for veterans. How can the national contract regarding staffing support, how can the national contract regarding staffing support assist Hampton in cases like the anesthesiology department and the lab?
It can assist, Congressman, and in fact, the Medical Center and Vision 6 are engaging on the Integrated Clinical Staffing Program contract, which we put in place very specifically for this reason. It is a fast vehicle to bring on temporary support while you're recruiting for folks. And so in the anesthesiology department, that is where we have the most significant need, and they're engaging with it right now.
So how fast is fast? What's the time frame? And where do you find folks temporarily or for a temporary role?
There's a good number of healthcare providers, Congressman, that decide to spend at least a portion of their career going into temporary contracts. It's a higher compensation, per day worked, per patient seen. It's not necessarily a sustainable lifestyle for a lot of people, but there is a pool of clinicians that are often able to be entering your organization on a temporary contract, and that's what Hampton is using for anesthesiology right now.
And is that across departments, or is this unique to anesthesiology, the temporary employee piece?
It's a very flexible tool that can bring in clinicians of many, many different types, but also administrative and support staff as well.
And how long, on average, does a temporary physician, how long are they there? I know it depends on the hiring, but I mean in general.
So we really try to minimize the time that we need contracted staff per FTE. It is a higher cost, as you might imagine, for our healthcare system. And the most important thing and the ultimate goal is to bring on permanent healthcare workers onto our team. So we can get data back to you in the committee on average, how long these folks end up being in our medical center. It's also a function of how long it takes to onboard our employees, which in my view is still too long.
Yeah. I want to talk to the question to the Inspector General. One of the things that we've seen, Hampton, Aurora, Loma, Linda, others, is some leadership issues, culture challenges, and some of the senior leadership and staffing issues have been addressed, and those leaders who are causing problematic cultures were removed, and I think that's a good thing. Dr. El-Nahal placed interim leadership in those facilities that have taken steps towards addressing challenges like degraded culture, unclear, unenforced policies, staffing shortages, et cetera. Can you speak to the role of the interim leadership at these facilities that face challenges such as Hampton and Aurora, and what are the characteristics that you observe among leadership at these high-performing VA facilities?
So having acting leaders can be a challenge. Many of them feel they're caretakers and they are not looking forward as they should be. What we have found with the good leaders is they're engaged in what they do. They understand that they have to make clear roles and responsibilities. They ensure there's a focus on patient safety. And they look at the back end. What kind of quality reviews, quality assurance are they doing? And so we've seen that at different facilities. I'd also like to say that with respect to some of the facilities that you mentioned, what we found was a very passive VISN oversight. A VISN's in place to ensure that the facilities under their responsibility are doing their jobs. And each of the ones you mentioned, the VISN wasn't there at the appropriate time to identify issues and make changes if necessary.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative. I now recognize Representative Luttrell for 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ellenhall, Ms. Budzinski brought up a pretty valid point. I live in a very rural district as well, so community care is very important to my veterans. And I understand there needs to be a synergy there between the VA and between community care, and the back and forth needs to be very fluid. One issue that I had the opportunity to meet with some of the VA leadership in my district recently, it was Veteran Town Hall. And one of the biggest discrepancies, I guess, maybe you can answer this question for me, whether or not it needs to be legislation or something the VA can enact, but if a veteran is pushed out to community care for specific treatments, whatever that may be, say a leg surgery, knee surgery, that the VA cannot handle, after the surgery, the VA can handle the rehab, okay? But what is lost in translation to the veteran is that, hey, we're going to send you to community care to a neurosurgeon, but you're going to have to come back to the VA for rehab. And talking with the VA staff, like that system, that particular portion, there's no communication. So how do we fix that as oversight? How would we fix the communication problem between the VA, community care, and the veteran so they do understand, or is that specifically to that particular department?
Well, the most important thing we have to do, Congressman, is ensure that we're communicating as clearly and effectively as we can to the veteran, setting expectations to understand exactly what they should expect.
Should that come from the VA or the community care, or both?
It should come from our referring providers into the community in the VA. We should be the ones holding the hand of the vet through each step of the process.
And educating on them, saying, hey, look, you're going to have knee surgery here in the community, but you're coming back to the VA for rehab. And that needs to be very clear, and it's not currently.
Listen, I take that feedback, and for any specific cases, obviously we will dive on it. But that's good feedback for me to have. It is our responsibility to coordinate the care. It's not on the community.
And to piggyback on that particular issue, we talked about this earlier, the transference of the medical record is not coming back in time, if you will. Because, and the way I understand this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I understand it, community care has no window to push back the person's medical record back to the VA. Because I have veterans say, hey, look, I'm back at the VA. They don't have my record. They don't have any idea I had the surgery. And when the VA reaches out to the community care provider, they're like, hey, we'll get it to you. But there's no legislative time frame, like 30 days. Are you familiar with that?
I am, Congressman. It used to be a requirement for payment for community providers to get records back to the VA. And a number of years ago, that requirement was taken away so that we could essentially pay community care providers.
Okay, is that something that this committee needs to re-engage and re-legislate, or is that something the VA can do?
I believe we have the latitude, Congressman, to set this through either policy or regulation, but I don't want to misspeak on that. We'll get back to you. And obviously, if there were legislation on this, we would respect it and implement it.
I'd like to, let's sooner than later have those answers so we can move on it if it's necessary for us, or if the VA can handle it. Mr. McDonough, I'll speak to him directly and say, hey, I think this is I'll let you guys do it. Thank you. Mr. Jacobs, with the ask for the supplemental, the $2.8 billion, or the $2 billion, I think I heard you correctly. We had moved appropriations, and then you had the annual VA meeting where the projection increased. Is that correct?
We updated our projection in about June, and then we had to work to verify and validate that the assumptions going into that updated projection were valid.
Okay, as extremely challenging as this may be to follow where Congress is when we're doing our job, or not, is there any way we can have those assumptions beforehand?
I share your frustration, and if there was any way, I would have shared those earlier. What I will commit to you, though, is we are working to figure out what changes we need to make on the front end. I will say our original assumptions underestimated our workforce because they over-delivered. They have been over-delivering, and we anticipate.
Which is great.
It's a great thing
Good
for
on 'em.
veterans.
But if we're looking at the books, which we have to do, if the assumptions and the workforce can work in parallel, that makes it extremely easier for us to keep tabs with you and make sure that you have everything that you need.
Yes, sir.
With the IG investigation, I got to tell you, I'm not going to say it's always I don't have enough time for that question, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. I apologize. Mr. Missel, you're fortunate, sir. I was going to leverage your statements, but I would like to catch both the undersecretaries after class for some talking points.
Will do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative. I now recognize the ranking member, Representative Takano.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'd like to say to the panel, we all know that accountability should be looking at the root problems, which, by the way, involves much more than just finding out who knew what when. Accountability is also about taking responsibility for problems, identifying areas for improvement, and following through with solutions. We measure success based on how an individual or organization course corrects and safeguards against that problem recurring in the future. This Congress, I have visited VA facilities across the country, including in eastern Colorado, Loma Linda, Hampton, and Buffalo. I didn't visit Hampton and Buffalo, but my staff did. We've met with the leadership and staff to hear directly how these facilities are responding to the various challenges they face. And it became clear during our visits that there are cultural changes happening at these facilities, and they are staffed with dedicated individuals who truly live by the VA mission and deeply care for veterans. Leaders are learning from their prior shortfalls and pivoting to ensure that they foster a positive environment to both give and receive care. Now, Dr. Aldenhall, you are leader of the largest integrated health system in the country. You oversee operations of 172 hospitals and about 1,100 outpatient clinics and more than 371,000 employees who care for over 7 million veterans each year. how do you identify and approach the many challenges that VA faces?
One of the most important things we have to do, Mr. Ranking Member, is set clear expectations for all of our leaders on matters like oversight, matters like who's responsible for what in the leadership team and the chain of command. And so we released a policy in part in response to the many findings that Mr. Missel and his team in the OIG have found on lapses in oversight that have allowed problems to linger longer than one should expect or hope. And so we released that policy in mid-August, and we intend to enforce it, and we are enforcing it, to ensure that every leader understands their responsibilities. I will say that the vast majority of our leaders are achieving historically high outcomes on veteran trust, quality, and access, at least compared year over year. But where we are seeing shortfalls in the list of the facilities you mentioned, a common theme is, problems were lingering. Medical centers didn't necessarily raise those issues to VISNs, which means they don't get to our attention at headquarters. That just can't happen. We have to be internally transparent so that we can be externally transparent to veterans in this committee.
Well, thank you. I want to move on to another topic. We both have talked about the growth of community care or for-profit care. Not all of community care is for-profit, but a big chunk of it is. The growth of that of non-VA care impacting VA's budget. Can you talk about what the impact has been, the rate of growth, and what strategies you are employing to staunch that growth and maybe even roll it back?
Community care growth, Congressman, has been very substantial over the last several years. So far this fiscal year, we're at about 16% growth in referrals into the community compared to last year alone. Last year and the year before ranged between 16 and 18%. This is all year-over-year growth. So one of the things we've done is ensure our entire operation is empowering every single veteran who comes into care with all of their options, including if they qualify for community care, to say, yes, you qualify for community care, here are your set of options. You can also receive a telehealth appointment on this date, an in-person appointment on a different date. A clinical resource hub can help you, whatever it might be. And as a result, we started at the beginning of the fiscal year with about a 20% year-over-year growth in care in the community as of January, and now we're at 16%, not because we're not offering community care options, but side by side, we're increasingly offering other VA options. And just one metric that you might be interested in, our clinical resource hubs, which is the VISN-wide capacity source for many veterans across that region, we are up 30% year over year on those appointments. We're also up significantly on interfacility consults, over 16%, meaning veteran normally gets care at one medical center, we refer instead of the community to another VA medical center, and they take us up on it, and they choose that option instead. So we're not affecting the list of options, we're simply adding and ensuring that we're reliably offering VA options at every turn.
Well, I certainly appreciate that you initially started at 20% referrals and now are at 16%, but that's still very high. Does VHA have any plans to update its cost projection models moving forward so it can better forecast its budgetary needs?
We are definitely looking into that, Mr. Ranking Member. We noticed since the Mission Act was passed that the main way that we project our costs into the future, which is a tool called the Enrollee Healthcare Projection Model, there is beginning to be some deviation between what our actual costs end up being and what that model predicts. And it all kind of seems to, at this point, map to exactly when the Mission Act was passed, which, as you know, vastly opened the doors of eligibility into community care. So we're doing a lot of work now on understanding how we can project more accurately, especially with the experience of this year. And the other important policy, as you know, Congressman, is the PACT Act, which massively expanded the doors that veterans overall can enter into the system. So those are big changes, and we do have to alter our projections to map to those phenomena.
Well, thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Crane for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for showing up today. I'm going to be honest, I love being lectured and gaslit by Democrat members on this panel that have never served this country. are not veterans and have never received health care at the VA about how we're trying to privatize the VA. I want to repeat what Chairman Boss says. That is absolutely not what we're trying to do. We're here to conduct oversight because this isn't your money. It's not my money. This is the taxpayers' money. And they sent us here to try to be better stewards of it, something that we all know that we're not good at in this town. I want to start with you, Dr. Elnahal. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Perfectly.
Great. So you're seeking an additional $3 billion today after the VA budget was fully funded. Is that correct, sir?
VHA, the healthcare system, is requesting $12 billion in additional funds for the healthcare system.
Okay.
You may be referring to the VBA funding.
Okay. Thank you. So $12 billion.
Yes, for VHA.
So we do understand, sir, that the VA is a massive organization and has a very important mission, and that projections aren't always able to foresee and account for every unexpected thing that might come down the path with how big the mission is. But it does make it harder to swallow when we read reports from the IG about how millions of dollars that were supposed to be used for veterans go to bonuses for senior executives at the VA. Do you understand how that might create an optical issue?
Of course, Congressman.
Mr. Missel, you're the Inspector General, is that correct?
That's correct.
How much money are we talking about here? How much money was supposed to go towards veterans that went towards bonuses for senior executives?
$10.8 million.
$10.8 million?
Yes.
It's not a small sum, is it, sir?
No, sir.
Did you interview Dr. Elnahal on this matter, sir?
Yes, we did.
What did you find?
What we found is that Dr. Elnahal didn't follow the process that was or VHA didn't follow the process that was in place, which was really not to group employees very broadly. What they did is they gave the incentive to all seniors, executives, instead of looking at what their criteria was. Are these people that fall under a different category? And then the controls broke down that were in place that where people raised questions, but it never stopped.
Mr. Jacobs, did you sign off on that decision?
I did approve that decision, yes, sir.
Why is that?
Congressman, as we were working to implement the PACT Act, one of the critical concerns we had was about, recruiting and retaining the workforce and the leadership that we need to meet the growing demand of veterans as a result of the PACT Act. And I was concerned about our ability to retain the leadership that was critical to our ability to launch the PACT Act within months rather than years, and to implement the policies that were needed to do so. And ultimately, what we realized is that we erred in the way that we implemented it. And so there were missed opportunities as an organization where voices raised concern, there were concerns raised that didn't get to us, expressing disagreement. And there were also personal shortcomings on my
Real quick, Mr. Jacobs, what has been done to rectify this issue?
Congressman, we have recouped 93% of the senior executive CSI payments for central office leaders. We notified...
Were you ordered to do that, Dr. Elnahal? Was that your call to recoup that money, or was it the Secretary?
It was the Secretary's call. He did work with Undersecretary Jacobs and myself, and we, of course, agreed with that decision.
When we see things like that happen, because Dr. Elnahal, I'm sure this isn't the last time that you'll appear before this committee, is there anything else, any decisions that you've made along those same type of lines that the OIG, or the IG is going to be writing reports about in the future that you know of?
Not that I'm aware of, Congressman, and as my colleague Josh just said, I definitely made mistakes myself. There were mistakes made across the agency on this. To the extent that any veteran heard about this and had their trust compromised in the VA, I apologize to them. And my most important task now is to make sure that this never happens again. And we implement all of the recommendations that we concurred with in Mr. Missel's and the IG's report. And my commitment to you is to ensure that all of them are implemented.
Thank you, Doctor, and I appreciate you taking accountability for that. It's not something that happens often up here in Washington. I yield back.
The chair will now recognize myself for 5 minutes. To Mr. Missel, the OIG has published several reports involving the Hampton VA Medical Center that substantiated many allegations related to clinical care. These reports highlight substantial failures to deliver adequate care, endangering veterans and undermining the trust of the Hampton Roads community. There was a 2022 report, multiple failures in test results, follow-up for patient diagnosed with prostate cancer, a 2023 report, delay in diagnosis and treatment for a patient with a new lung mass, and a 2024 report, mismanaged surgical privileging actions and deficient surgical service quality management processes. What has the OIG identified as being the root cause of these substantiated allegations? And to what extent were Hampton VA's leadership responsible for the facility's many failures?
I think the bottom line is the leadership is responsible for the failures that occurred. I think there was a theme in all three of these reports that some basic fundamental processes were just not followed. Some of them were just not even, the leadership was not even aware of it. And again, going back to what I was saying about VISN oversight, the VISN wasn't involved in the facility at all, never recognized that there were issues with leadership at the facility.
Why was the VISN not involved with leadership there?
They took a very passive approach, and they said they weren't aware of it. Nobody told them what the issues were. And we've seen in report after report, when there's passive VISN oversight, they're not able to identify problems as early as they should and to deal with them when they should.
Has that changed with some of the leadership changes that have happened recently?
We're still looking at that. We have open recommendations, certainly on the most recent report about Hampton, so we're going to follow up on that.
Please keep a close eye as the person who represents many of the veterans that use that facility. And follow-up question for Mr. Missel. In each of these reports, the OIG mentions a series of recommendations that the Hampton VA Medical Center must implement. Which of these outstanding recommendations have not yet been implemented, and have you received feedback from Hampton VA Medical Center explaining why hospital leadership has not been able to implement your OIG's recommendations?
We check with the facility on a quarterly basis to see the progress that they're making. The two earlier reports, I believe there's still one outstanding recommendation, but we understand the facility is working on it. And then the most recent report, it's too early at this point to have them close out. But again, we're available to speak with the facility about any issues they may have, and we help them close them out and ensure that the recommendations address the issues and that the issues will be improved going forward.
So will you continue to follow up and make sure each of the recommendations have been followed?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And to Dr. Elnahal, in your testimony, you state how the VISN's chief medical officer has been addressing issues at Hampton since August 2023. Over a year later, there's still clearly still issues present. So why did it take so long for the medical center director to be removed pending an investigation, and why has it taken so long to address these concerns?
I think those are very fair questions, Congresswoman, and I've been working with you and your staff for some time on all of these problems. It's never an easy decision to detail out a leader. Ultimately, our network director made that decision based on many of the findings that have accumulated over time with investigations from the Office of the Inspector General and the Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection. So when he recommended that decision to me, I immediately accepted it. And we made those moves for temporary reassignments and brought in a very experienced and effective leader, Walt Dannenberg, who's normally the director at Long Beach, California. I've already had contact with him about the improvements he's trying to make, and he is dead focused on making sure that things improve there for veterans at Hampton.
And we have met with him as well recently and are very encouraged by that leadership change. And I've only been in this position for almost 2 years now in my first term, but this has been the biggest issue that we have heard complaints about. We get complaints about a lot of things, you'd be surprised, but the VA healthcare issue for myself, representing one of the largest veteran populations in the country, it was unconscionable, just the number of not just patients, but the whistleblowers. I think we interviewed 25 whistleblowers from janitors to surgeons. So thank you very much for working with my office to rectify those issues and to provide new leadership. We are looking forward to also continuing to follow with them to make sure that we're seeing improved patient clinical outcomes. And then just to follow up, Mr. Allenhall, Hampton currently has a dangerous shortage of providers as well. That was one of their issues. For example, employees have expressed concerns to my office about a dangerous and persistent shortage of personnel at the clinical laboratory, and the hospital currently only has one anesthesiologist on staff. What are you doing to ensure the staffing issue, specifically about anesthesiologists, is resolved?
Yeah, one of the immediate things is making use of a nationwide staffing contract vehicle that we now have called the Integrated Clinical Staffing Program. It turns out that we have a number of certified registered nurse anesthetists, but we need ultimate supervision from physician anesthesiologists, and so we're primarily trying to recruit through that vehicle. The most important thing to do is to get permanent anesthesiologists on, and we maintain our efforts to try to get those folks on permanently. I will again say that the $12 billion anomaly in the CR, which would go directly into VA healthcare, would allow us to grow our workforce instead of having to attrit our workforce to maintain within the budget. And so that'll be a very helpful tool to liberate every medical center that needs to bring in more clinicians, activate new services, and better serve the veterans in their regions. And we hope that Congress considers that.
And I ask that you allow nurse anesthetists to be able to practice to the full scope that they are allowed to practice. I think they are a great way to supplement that anesthesiology shortage. And I know that we have heard even in this committee setting just about the length of time that it takes to hire and bring on new providers. So just making sure that we are expeditiously doing the entire process and clearance and whatnot, but hiring them, because I think we lose some good providers along the way. And last question from me, Dr. Allenhall, some of the OIG reports at Hampton mention outdated software and EHR concerns as contributing to patient safety problems. Can you speak to what the VA is doing to modernize the VA's IT system to ensure veterans are receiving 21st century standard care? And specifically, I'd like to know what's being done to assist community care providers, outside primary care providers, the ability to have access to health information and patient safety flags. I know as a nurse practitioner practicing in a primary care setting, it was very frustrating. I could get charts and information and notes from all kinds of specialty care clinics. When it came to my veterans, I would look right at them and say, you've got to go there yourself, you got to get it printed out, and you got to hand carry it from the VA to our office, because I won't be able to get it, and all of my wonderful office staff won't be able to get it via fax or any other way. So that was a problem, and it created a lot of continuity of care problems. So what are you doing specifically to address that technology need in the 21st century?
There was definitely a contribution when it came to our technological tools on, this is really difficult to read some of these reports, but the really tragic case of a veteran with lung cancer who had serial delays in every step before they started treatment for ultimately what became a malignancy that spread to other organs. And part of that was the tools needed for referral into the next step and making sure folks were in scheduling queues when they needed to be. I think the bigger contributor, though, was reliable follow-through on our processes and holding all staff accountable for following through on every veteran, but in particular, veterans with serious diagnoses like cancer. Of course, we're trying to improve our systems around scheduling, so we have a lot of work going in collaboration with OIT to make it easier to schedule veterans into every subsequent step in their care. One specific move we're making is to do what's called provider-based scheduling, which allows you to see all the options for any physician or clinician available in any number of their clinics that they work in across the VA. We hope to go live with that soon, and that'll significantly reduce the task flow burden for every single person trying to coordinate that veteran's care. That's just one of many examples of some of the tech tools that will help us. We're still primarily accountable, though, for follow-through for every veteran with the tools that we have.
Thank you, and I look forward to continuing to work on the EHR integration throughout the VA as well. And then just one final question, just because this has been a topic that's come up multiple times, including in the media in my district, but that's with community care, specifically for chiropractic care. And what we have advocated on different levels, including meeting with the new executive director about that approval process. And for some reason, chiropractic care is always the one that's highlighted, but I believe, as a nurse practitioner, again, that we should be able to treat the veteran with the pain modality that they respond to the best. If it's chiropractic care, great. If it's physical therapy, if it's medicinal, whatever that pain modality is. But why can't we get that approval process done so that our veterans who respond best to chiropractic care can continue to get that chiropractic care? I don't want them to resort to other types of either we see overdose issues, we struggle with mental health issues. Let's get our veterans the proper treatment with the pain modality they respond to, and if it's chiropractic care, it should be that. So what is the VA doing to address that issue?
So, Congresswoman, I'd say that this occurs most of the time when it comes to our employees trying to assist every veteran with the next best step in their care. We have to, though, make sure it happens every single time, where we engage the veteran in care decisions. If a veteran tells us that chiropractic care is assisting with their pain and their function, we should do everything we can to honor that. Now, there may be sort of many dimensions of your question around how requests for service are approved to continue a community care episode, making that initial decision to refer a veteran to the community if we don't have chiropractic care. There's a lot of ways to tackle that, but we need to just be extremely veteran-centered on how we improve these processes, and that's my commitment to you.
Thank you very much, and I agree. All right, and then Chair now yields, and I will yield to Mr. Obernolte for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank Chairman Bost, Ranking Member Takano, and the other members of the Veterans Affairs Committee for allowing me to waive onto this hearing. It's very important to me because it highlights an issue that is critically important to my district. I represent a district with 5 military bases, over 40,000 veterans, and I also represent Loma Linda and the Veterans Affairs facility there. So what goes on at Loma Linda has a direct impact on all of the veterans that I represent and the quality of care that they receive. And as you all are aware, we've had some pretty troubling developments at VA Loma Linda, and I know everyone here on the panel is as committed as I am to trying to get to the bottom of those problems and fix them. What has become abundantly clear after this investigation, which I led with Chairman Bost, and we conducted dozens of interviews with whistleblowers. We had a bunch of letters, a couple of site visits, and we continue to review thousands of pages of documents. It seems very clear that a hostile work environment exists there. And thank goodness for the whistleblowers, because without them, we would not have visibility into the situation there. And when you have a hostile work environment, the concern is that people don't want to work there. And if people don't want to work there, you're not going to attract the best quality people. And if you can't attract the best quality people, then our veterans are not going to be receiving the quality of care that they should receive. And I know that we're all committed to fixing that problem. So, Dr. Elnahal, I'd like to start with you. Recently, the Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection conducted a climate review of VA Loma Linda, and I think it's fair to say the results were pretty damning. It's crystal clear that the employees there have a severe lack of trust in the leadership of Loma Linda. Do you believe that this is an indication of poor leadership, or is it something else there at the facility, and what needs to be done to fix that?
I read that climate review cover to cover, Congressman. Definitely some very concerning findings. What I think we need to do there is open every single avenue we can to have frontline voices heard when they consider a vulnerability or they report a vulnerability in the quality of care. We need to make sure employees are treated right by every supervisor. There's a very notable case of a supervisor who had a very toxic environment, ultimately went through the disciplinary chain and counseled that supervisor to improve. It takes time, Congressman, to change culture, but we are putting every single effort that we can into that medical center to hear the voices of our staff to ensure that veterans do better. And the one piece of good news that tells me that they're on a better trajectory is that they were formerly on what we call the highest tier of need, tier 1 on quality and patient safety. They've since graduated because they're starting to improve their quality metrics. There's still a lot of work to do, as highlighted by that climate report, but we're dead focused on it.
I'm glad to hear that. One of the most troubling aspects of that report to me was the fact that it highlighted that employees are still afraid to disclose wrongdoing because they fear retaliation. And with some of the allegations that were made, you know, their fears are justifiable. So what are you doing to reassure employees that they can come forward and report wrongdoing without being retaliated against?
The most important thing as a leader you can do to earn trust is to show up and to listen, and to not be only interacting with employees when you have bad news or you want them to do something. When I was a CEO of a single hospital before this in Newark, I would spend most of my days, at least a portion of it, doing what's called rounding, showing up to the units, both clinical and non-clinical. I know the director there is doing that himself. He's asking all of the executive leadership team members to do that. And when you show up and you're supportive, that's when trust is built. It takes much more time to build trust than it takes to lose trust. And I know that things are in a better direction there, but there's still much more work to do.
Let me ask you about another aspect that I've heard about from whistleblowers, and this is the frustration that nothing that they say ends up mattering. And the supervisorial employee that you highlighted earlier when we were discussing the situation is a good example. There was someone that was promoted despite these allegations. And then most recently, the director of the Loma Medical Medical Center just received the highest possible performance rating. This is a big frustration to the whistleblowers that I've spoken with, because they feel like they bring these issues up, nothing is done, and the people that they are talking about end up getting promoted instead of disciplined. So what can you tell those whistleblowers that might restore some of that trust?
Well, the most important thing that they should know is that we have to not only show up, but to follow through on what they're saying. And so, you know, I know what it's like as a physician to raise concerns to leadership about vulnerabilities in care, only to not see anything happen after that. Every single patient safety report that is flagged as a serious concern needs follow through. When you hold forums, you have to follow through on what you're hearing. That is part of accountability and leadership, and so I will definitely be reinforcing that with the VISN and medical center leadership.
Wow, thank you very much. And I see my time's expired, but I want to thank everyone for their testimony today, and let's all work together to try and get this situation resolved. The most troubling aspect of that climate review was the revelation that this problem is an ongoing problem. It's not one that's been solved yet, and so we really need to take action and restore trust there to make sure our veterans are receiving the kind of care that we all want them to receive. So thank you very much, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Ranking Member Takano, do you have any closing remarks?
I do not, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Ranking Member, and thank you all for being here today. It's clear the VA has an accountability problem that we are working to fix. It's unacceptable that time and time again, VA employees who have engaged in misconduct are just moved throughout the organization. Such moves allow these employees to infect other VA offices with their bad behavior or even put veterans at risk for adverse health consequences. I just want to say a personal thank you for taking action at the Hampton VA to replace the top three leadership there, the executive director, the chief of staff, the chief of surgery. I think these were changes that were certainly needed, and I really look forward to a change to the positive direction with the Hampton VA. But all these reasons that we talked about today is why Congress needs to pass the Restore Accountability Act of 2023. This bill would speed up the disciplinary process. A more efficient process would not only make sure employees found of wrongdoing were appropriately disciplined in a timely manner, but also allow VA employees accused of wrongdoing but never found responsible to have their name cleared. Accountability does not just mean appropriately dealing with misconduct. It also means showing good judgment and being transparent. This is why it's unacceptable the VA has failed to provide additional briefings on its budget shortfall since first notifying this committee of the budget issue nearly 2 months ago. Full transparency is needed here so such a situation never happens again. With that, I ask unanimous consent. All members shall have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous material. Hearing no objections, so ordered. The hearing is now adjourned.